I was the trash of the Silver Moon Pack, disowned by my father, beaten by my stepfather, and thrown out into a freezing blizzard to die on my 19th birthday. I thought my life was over. I thought I was nothing. But I didn't die in the snow. Instead, I was found by him, Eric the Deathbringer, the Alpha King who slaughtered his own family, the monster the entire world fears. My family thought they were throwing away a weak, wolfless runt. They had no idea they were handing the most dangerous man in existence his queen. Chapter 1. The Weight of Silence. The cracked mirror in the scullery was the only honest thing in the entire Silver Moon Packhouse. It didn't try to hide the dark circles under Isabella's eyes, nor the hollowness of her cheeks. But tonight, for the first time in years, it reflected something else. It reflected a ghost of the girl she used to be. Isabella ran her rough, calloused fingers over the silk of the dress. It was a deep midnight blue, the color of a bruised sky. It had belonged to her grandmother, salvaged from a moth-infested trunk in the attic where Isabella slept. For 3 nights, she had worked by candlelight, stitching the tears with threads stolen from her stepsister's sewing kit, praying her fingers wouldn't bleed onto the fabric. Isabella. The whisper was sharp, laced with a terrified urgency. Isabella didn't turn. She watched in the mirror as her mother, Lenora, slipped into the small, cold room. Lenora looked aged beyond her 40 years. Her hair was graying prematurely, and her shoulders were perpetually hunched as if expecting a blow. "What are you doing?" Lenora hissed, closing the door softly to ensure her husband, Beta Wraith, wasn't watching. Her eyes widened as she took in the dress. "Oh, gods, Isabella, take it off. Take it off right now." "I am 19, Mama. The winter solstice banquet is for all pack members. I have a right to be there." "Rights?" Lenora rushed forward, her hands fluttering nervously around Isabella's shoulders. "We have no rights here. We exist because Rafe allows it. If he sees you trying to look like them, he will throw us out." "Then let him," Isabella whispered. "And go where? We have no money, we have no wolf. Your father is dead, Isabella. Without Rafe's protection, we are rogues. We starve. You know what happens to wolfless women in the wilds." "Is this better?" Isabella culled away, gesturing to the damp, moldy walls of the scullery. "I am a slave in the house my father built. I cooked their meals, I scrubbed their floors, and I let Clara and Gemma treat me like a dog. You tell me to endure. For 10 years, Mama, I have endured." "It keeps you alive," Lenora pleaded. "Please, baby, just endure a little longer. Stay in the kitchen. Don't draw attention." Isabella looked at her mother, a woman who had once been the Luna of a proud house, now reduced to a shadow who flinched at the sound of footsteps. It broke Isabella's heart, but it also hardened it. "I'm done being invisible," Isabella said softly. She walked past her mother, the silk rustling like a whisper of rebellion. The hallway leading to the grand hall was a transition between worlds. It started cold and stone-walled, smelling of lye soap and damp earth. But as Isabella walked, the air grew warmer. The scent of roasted venison, spiced wine, and expensive perfume began to fill the air. She stopped at the edge of the heavy velvet curtains. The grand hall was dazzling. Chandeliers dripped with crystals, casting golden light over the elite of the Silver Moon Pack. But underneath the laughter and the clinking of crystal was a heavy, metallic scent. Power. It was the scent of alpha blood. Alphas from the 5 surrounding regions had gathered here tonight. Rumor had it that even the Conqueror King, Eric of the Shadowlands, was in attendance. He was a legend, a monster who had united two warring territories and slaughtered his own wicked uncle to take the throne. Isabella tried to shrink into the shadows. She didn't want to dance. She didn't want to mingle. She just wanted to stand in the light, just for a moment, and feel like a person. "Well, would you look at that?" The voice was sharp, grating, and instantly curdled the blood in Isabella's veins. She froze. Clara and Gemma, her stepsisters, stood 10 feet away. They were dressed in matching crimson silk, looking like vibrant, poisonous flowers. Clara held a goblet of dark red wine, her eyes scanning Isabella's mended dress with predatory delight. "Is that Grandmama's old curtains?" Clara laughed, her voice pitching high enough to turn heads nearby. "I thought we burned those rags years ago." "Leave me alone, Clara," Isabella said quietly, turning to retreat. "I don't think I will." Clara stepped closer, blocking Isabella's path. "Father gave specific orders. The trash stays in the bin. You're embarrassing us." She wrinkled her nose. "You smell like dishwater and desperation." The guests nearby had stopped talking. Eyes were turning toward them. Isabella felt the familiar heat of humiliation rising up her neck. She looked across the room and saw Beta Rafe standing near the Alphys table. Beside him stood her mother. Lenora saw everything. She saw Clara cornering her daughter. But she didn't move. She stared fixedly at the floor, her hands clasped white-knuckled in front of her. "Endure," her silence screamed. "Go back to the kitchen, Isabella," Gemma sneered, stepping up beside her sister. "Before Father has to drag you." "I am a member of this pack. My father was Alpha before yours was even a Beta." The silence in the immediate circle was deafening. Mentioning Isabella's biological father, the true former Alpha, was forbidden. Clara's face went blotchy red. "Your father was weak, just like you, just like your mother." With a casual flick of her wrist, Clara tipped her goblet. It wasn't an accident. It was precise. The cold, dark wine splashed over Isabella's head. It ran into her eyes, stinging and blurring her vision. It dripped out her chin, soaking into the midnight blue silk, turning the bodice black and heavy. The dress she had spent 3 nights saving, the last piece of her heritage, ruined in a heartbeat. Gemma laughed, a cruel, bubbling sound. "Oops, clumsy me." Isabella stood there, the sticky liquid running down her neck. She wiped her eyes, blinking through the red haze. She looked at the guests. Some were smirking. Most were looking away, indifferent to the cruelty. Something inside Isabella snapped. It wasn't a loud crack. It was the quiet, terrifying sound of a chain finally breaking. No more. Isabella reached for a heavy crystal pitcher of ice water sitting on a nearby serving table. The condensation was cold on her palm. "You think that's funny?" Isabella whispered. "What are you going to do?" Gemma scoffed. "Cry?" Isabella stepped forward and hurled the contents of the pitcher with all her strength. The wave of ice water hit Clara square in the chest. It soaked her expensive crimson gown, plastered her hair to her skull, and sent her stumbling backward with a shriek of shock. She slipped on the wet floor and went down hard, taking a tray of appetizers with her. Crash! The sound echoed through the hall like a gunshot. The music stopped instantly. "You little wretch!" Beta Rafe covered the distance across the room in seconds. He didn't ask questions. He didn't look at his soaked daughter. He saw only disobedience. He backhanded Isabella across the face with a force that lifted her off her feet. Isabella hit the floor hard, the taste of copper flooding her mouth. Her cheek throbbed with a blinding pain. "I have fed you. I have clothed you," Rafe roared, his face purple with rage, looming over her like a tower. And this is how you repay me? By attacking a noble daughter of this house? She assaulted me. Isabella pushed herself up on one arm, spitting blood onto the polished floor. She ruined my dress. She started it. She is a lady, Rafe bellowed, his spit flying. And you are a burden, a wolfless mistake. He grabbed Isabella by the back of her ruined dress, hauling her up so roughly the fabric tore. He didn't let her stand. He dragged her toward the grand entrance doors. Rafe, please! Lenora's voice was a weak wail from the crowd, but she didn't step forward. She stayed in the safety of the onlookers. Silence, woman! Rafe shouted back. He kicked the double doors open. The winter wind howled outside, a blizzard raging against the warmth of the hall. The snow was falling in thick, blinding sheets. Get out, Rafe spat. He shoved Isabella forward. She stumbled down the icy stone steps, her feet slipping. She landed hard on the frozen cobblestones of the courtyard. The cold bit through her wet dress instantly, like 1,000 needles piercing her skin. You are no longer welcome under my roof, Rafe announced to the silent hall, loud enough for the visiting alphas to hear. I disown you. Go find a ditch to die in. The heavy oak doors slammed shut. The lock clicked with a finality that echoed in Isabella's soul. She was alone. Isabella lay on the ice, shivering violently. The wine on her skin was freezing, turning sticky and cold. She curled into a ball, trying to preserve whatever heat she had left. Click! A small service door to the side of the entrance cracked open. Isabella looked up, hope flaring in her chest. Mama? Lenora slipped out, shivering in the wind. She held a small burlap sack. She didn't look Isabella in the eye. She shoved the sack into Isabella's frozen hands. Take it, Lenora whispered, tears streaming down her face. There's bread, cheese, a few coins. Mama, come with me, Isabella begged, her teeth chattering. Lenora shook her head, stepping back toward the warmth of the house. I can't. I'm too old to be a rogue, Isabella. I have to stay. He hit me, Isabella whispered, the betrayal hurting more than the cold. And you're staying? I'm sorry, Lenora sobbed. Endure, Isabella. Just survive. She turned and ran back inside, bolting the door behind her. Isabella stared at the wood. She didn't cry. The tears had frozen on her cheeks. She stood up on her shaky legs, clutching the meager bag of food. The wind whipped her hair across her face as she turned toward the main gates. She had to keep moving. If she stopped, the cold would kill her. She kept her head down, fighting against the wind, her vision blurred. She didn't see the figure standing in the shadow of the gatehouse. She didn't sense him. Her lack of a wolf made her blind to auras. She slammed straight into a wall. No, not a wall, a chest. It was like hitting a mountain. The figure didn't budge an inch. Isabella gasps, stumbling back, losing her footing on the ice. She braced for the impact of the ground. It never came. A hand, large and hot enough to burn through the cold, clamped on through her arm. It steadied her with terrifying strength. Careful, a deep voice rumbled. It wasn't a normal voice. It was a subterranean growl, a sound that vibrated in the hollow of her chest. It commanded absolute attention. Isabella looked up. The man was massive. He wore black armor that seemed to absorb the moonlight and a heavy fur cloak dusted with snow. His face was sharp, brutal, and beautiful, marred by a jagged scar running through his left eyebrow. He radiated an aura of power so dense it felt suffocating, like the air before a lightning strike. This was a killer. A king. Isabella tried to pull away, terror spiking in her chest. I'm sorry, Alpha. I didn't see you. I'm leaving. Please. The man didn't let go. He didn't move. He was staring at her face. Specifically, he was staring at her eyes. Isabella flinched. She hated her eyes. They were silver. The mark of a freak, her stepfather always said. But the alpha wasn't looking at her with disgust. His eyes, which were a startling, predatory gold, suddenly dilated. The gold was swallowed by black, and specks of green flared in the darkness. He inhaled sharply. His nostrils flared as he took in her scent, the cheap wine, the cold snow, and beneath it all, vanilla. His grip on her arm tightened, pulling her a fraction of an inch closer. Silver, he murmured. The words sounded like a prayer. Isabella froze. The memory hit her with the force of a physical blow. 5 years ago, the muddy alley behind the market, a starving boy, wounded and bleeding from a mesmerizing fight, hiding behind the crates. She had been 14. She had given him half her meat pie. He had looked up at her, his face covered in mud, and stared at her with those exact same eyes. He had touched her face and whispered, "Silver." Isabella looked at the Conqueror King, her breath hitching in her throat. "It's you!" Eric of the Shadowlands didn't smile, but the terrifying hardness of his face cracked, revealing an intensity that made Isabella's knees weak. "I promised I would find you," he rasped, his thumb brushing the frozen tear from her cheek. "And I never break a promise." Chapter 2. The Shadow of the Beast. The wind howled around them, a feral thing tearing at the edges of the world. But in the circle of Eric's grip, the air was strangely still. It was as if the blizzard itself was afraid to touch him. Isabella trembled, but not just from the cold. It was the heat radiating off him. It was unnatural, a furnace-like warmth that seeped through his black armor and burned against her frozen skin. It was the only warmth she had felt in 10 years, and it terrified her. "Let me go," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just leaving." She tried to twist out of his grasp, but his hand was an iron shackle. He didn't squeeze, but he didn't yield. He simply held her, tethering her to the earth when she felt ready to float away into the snow and die. Eric didn't answer immediately. He was studying her face with a terrifying intensity, cataloging every detail as if reading a map of a war zone. His golden eyes traced the bruise blooming on her cheekbone, dark and angry against her pale skin. They lingered on her split lip, the dried blood flaking in the cold. They narrowed at the sticky, frozen wine staining her hair and the rumen silk dress. A low, vibrating sound started in his chest. It wasn't a growl. It was deeper. It was the sound of a tectonic plate shifting before an earthquake. "Who did this?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made Isabella's knees buckle. "It doesn't matter," Isabella stammered, casting a fearful glance back toward the pack house. The heavy oak doors were shut, but she could still hear the faint, muffled sounds of the music inside. They were dancing while she froze. I tripped, please, Alpha. If my stepfather sees me bothering a guest, he'll..." "He'll what?" Eric cut her off. The gold in his eyes flared, swallowing the iris. "He threw you out into a storm? What more can he do to you?" Isabella slumped. He was right. The realization hit her with a fresh wave of despair. She had nothing left to lose because she had nothing left to keep. "I have to go," she said, her voice hollow. "I have to find shelter before the frost sets in." "You have shelter," Eric rumbled. Before Isabella could process the words, he moved. The motion was a blur of black fur and leather. He unclasped the heavy wolf fur cloak from his shoulders. It was enormous, lined with silk and smelling of pine, wood smoke, and something uniquely him, like ozone before a lightning strike. He swung it around her. The weight of it nearly knocked her over, but it enveloped her instantly, blocking out the biting wind. It was still warm from his body heat. "Alpha, I can't take this," Isabella gasped, clutching the edges of the expensive fur with her dirty hands. "This is worth more than my life." "Then your life has been undervalued," Eric stated flatly. He reached out, his thumb brushing the bruise on her cheek again. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through her spine that made her gasp. She didn't have a wolf, she had been told that since she was a child, so why did her soul feel like it was vibrating? "You don't remember me, do you?" she whispered, looking up at him. "The boy in the alley, 5 years ago. You were starving." Eric's expression softened. A crack in the stone facade. "I remembered the mud. I remembered the pain of my uncle's knife in my side. But mostly, I remember the girl who smelled like vanilla and rain. The girl who gave a dying rogue her only meal." He leaned down, his face inches from hers. The intensity of his gaze was overwhelming. "I told you I would never forget those eyes. I spent 5 years building an army so I could come back to this region. I didn't come for the alliance, Isabella. I didn't come for the banquet." Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. "Why did you come?" "I came to pay my debt," he murmured. Click. The heavy oak doors of the pack house groaned open again. Light spilled out onto the snow, blinding them for a moment. Beta Rafe stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 pack guards. He looked flushed with wine and indignation, likely checking to ensure the trash had actually left the property. "What is going on here?" Rafe barked, peering into the darkness. "I told you to leave, girl. If you're begging guests for coin, I'll have you whipped before you freeze." Isabella flinched instinctively, shrinking into Eric's cloak. The reaction was small, but Eric felt it. The air around them changed instantly. The protective warmth vanished, replaced with a cold, killing pressure. Eric straightened up. He didn't shift, but his shadow seemed to stretch and darken, looming over the courtyard like a monster. He turned slowly to face Rafe. "Whipped?" Eric repeated the word. He tasted it, spat it out. Rafe froze. He finally realized who was standing in the dark. His face went from a red to a sickly shade of pale. He recognized the black armor. He recognized the sheer size of the man. Alpha! Alpha Eric!" Rafe stammered, bowing hastily. I apologize. I didn't realize you were outside. This girl, she is a servant, a disgrace. She was just leaving. I hope she hasn't bothered you. She is mentally unwell, you see. A liar and a thief." Isabella squeezed her eyes shut. Liar, thief, disgrace. The words were familiar lashes. "She is wearing my cloak," Eric said. His voice wasn't loud, but it projected across the courtyard with perfect clarity. "Does she look like a thief to you, Beta? Or does she look like someone under my protection?" Rafe blinked, staring at the massive fur cloak wrapping the small girl. Confusion warred with fear on his face. "Protection? Alpha, surely you jest. That is Isabella. She is wolfless. She is nothing. Her own father was a failure, and she is—" Eric moved. He didn't run. He didn't charge. He simply appeared at the bottom of the steps, closing the 20-foot distance in a heartbeat that defied human capability. He grabbed Rafe by the throat. It was a casual motion, one-handed. As if he were picking up a rag doll, Eric lifted the heavy beta man off the ground until his boots dangled inches above the ice. Rafe choked, clawing uselessly at the leather gauntlet, crushing his windpipe. The guards leveled their spears, but Eric didn't even look at them. He let out a low, warning snarl that dropped them to their knees in submission. It was the voice of a true alpha, a frequency that forced biology to obey. "Careful with your next words," he whispered to the choking man. You are speaking about the woman who saved my life. You call her nothing. I call her the only reason I am breathing." He tightened his grip. Rafe's face turned purple. "You threw her into the snow. You struck her. I can smell her blood on your knuckles." "Mercy!" he wheezed. Isabella watched, paralyzed. For 10 years, Rafe had been the monster in her closet. He was untouchable. He was the law. And now he was dangling like a caught rabbit, helpless against a true predator. She should have felt vindicated. Instead, she felt terrified. If Eric killed a pack beta on diplomatic grounds, it would mean war. The Silver Moon Alpha, her biological uncle, would have to retaliate. "Stop!" Isabella cried out. Her voice cut through the wind. She ran forward, tripping on the hem of the massive cloak. "Eric, stop! Don't kill him!" Eric froze. He looked back at her. The red haze of bloodlust in his eyes cleared slightly, returning to that intense gold. "He deserves to break," Eric said simply. "Yes," Isabella admitted, stepping closer, her hand hovering near his armored arm. "But not tonight. Not for me. If you kill him, they'll hunt you. You just got your kingdom back. Don't lose it over someone like me." Eric looked at the beta, then at Isabella. He saw the fear in her eyes, not for herself, but for him. With a sneer of disgust, Eric threw Rafe aside. The beta crashed into the stone pillar of the entryway, sliding down into a heap, gasping for air. Eric wiped his gloved hand on his trousers as if he had touched something rotting. He walked back to Isabella. He didn't look at the guards. He didn't look at the house. "We are leaving," he announced. "Leaving?" Isabella blinked. "Where?" "My camp is a mile past the ridge." He reached down and, without asking, swept her up into his arms. He held her bridal style, her weight seemingly non-existent to him. "I can't just go with you," Isabella whispered, though she instinctively wrapped her arms around his neck to steady herself. "I'm a scullery maid. I don't have a wolf." Eric began to walk, his long strides eating up the distance away from the pack house, away from her prison. "You're not a maid," he murmured into the top of her head, shielding her from the wind with his body. "And as for your wolf, we will see." He stopped at the edge of the forest, looking back one last time at the Silver Moon pack house. "One day," he promised, his voice a dark vow, "they will realize what they threw away. And by then, you will be so far above them, they will break their necks trying to look up to you." He turned into the dark of the trees, carrying her out of hell and into the unknown. For the first time in 10 years, Isabella closed her eyes and didn't pray for morning. She just listened to the steady, rhythmic thud of the monster's heart, beating against her own. Chapter 3. The Silence Between Heartbeats. The forest was a living thing, breathing cold mist and ancient shadows, but Isabella felt none of it. She was wrapped in a cocoon of wolf fur and the scent of ozone, suspended in a surreal space between the hell she had left and the unknown she was traveling toward. Eric didn't stop at the tree line. He carried her deeper into the woods, his boots crunching rhythmically against the frozen earth. He moved with a predator's grace, silent, efficient, and tireless. Isabella should have been terrified. She was alone in the wilderness with a man known as the Deathbringer, a king who had conquered 2 territories by the blade of his sword. But as her cheek rested against the cold metal of his breastplate, she didn't feel fear. She felt a strange magnetic pull, a hum in her blood that she had never experienced before. It was as if the empty space inside her, the void where her wolf was supposed to be, was resonating with the thundering beat of his heart. "You're shivering," Eric murmured. The vibration of his voice traveled through his chest and into hers. "I'm fine," Isabella lied, her teeth chattering. "It's just the adrenaline." "You are not fine," he corrected her gently. You are freezing, malnourished, and in shock. But we are almost there. They broke through a dense thicket of pine into a small clearing. It wasn't a palace, and it wasn't the main army encampment. It was a temporary outpost, a circle of heavy canvas tents guarded by 6 massive wolves who sat as still as stone statues. As Eric stepped into the light of the central fire, the wolves rose instantly. They didn't growl. They lowered their heads, dipping their muzzles to the snowy ground in absolute submission. Isabella shrank against Eric. They are huge! They are my vanguard, Eric explained, not breaking his stride. They will not touch you. To them, you are under the king's cloak. That makes you sacred. Sacred? The word felt alien on her skin. For 10 years, she had been trash, burden, mistake. Eric carried her straight to the largest tent. He ducked inside, shielding her head with his hand. The interior was surprisingly warm, heated by a brazier of glowing coals. The floor was covered in thick rugs, and a simple cot sat in the corner. It smelled of him, leather, steel, and that crisp, stormy scent. He finally set her down on the edge of the cot. The loss of his body heat was instantaneous and painful. Isabella wrapped his massive cloak tighter around herself, feeling small and ridiculous. She was a scullery maid sitting in a king's war tent covered in dried wine and mud. Eric turned away, removing his gauntlets with sharp metallic clicks. He moved to a small chest and pulled out a flask and a wrapped bundle. "Drink," he commanded, handing her the flask. "It's spiced mead. It will warm your blood." Isabella took it with trembling hands. She took a small sip. The liquid burned pleasantly down her throat, spreading a dull heat through her stomach. She coughed, and Eric's lips quirked upward, a microscopic movement that softened the jagged scar on his brow. He sat down on a wooden stool opposite her, the bundle in his hands. He unwrapped it to reveal fresh bread, dried venison, and a wedge of hard cheese. "Eat," he said. Isabella stared at the food, her stomach cramped with a sudden violent hunger. At the pack house, she ate scraps, crusts left over from the main table, stew that had gone cold. Fresh meat was a luxury she hadn't tasted in months. She reached for the bread, but her hand hesitated halfway. She flinched, her eyes darting to his face. Eric frowned, his golden eyes darkening. "What is it?" "Is there—" She swallowed hard, shame coloring her cheeks. "Is there a price? Rafe always said nothing is free. If I eat this, what do I owe you?" The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Eric looked at her as if she had slapped him. The anger that flashed across his face wasn't directed at her, but it was terrifying nonetheless. He stood up, pacing the small confines of the tent like a caged tiger. "A price?" he growled, his voice rough. "You think I am buying you with bread?" "I don't know," Isabella whispered, shrinking back. "I don't know how this works. I don't know why you saved me. You said you owed me a debt, but I just gave you a meat pie 5 years ago. That doesn't equal this. You fought a beta for me. You took me from my home." Eric stopped pacing. He dropped to one knee in front of her, bringing his face level with hers. The sheer size of him was overwhelming, yet he made himself small to look her in the eye. "Isabella," he said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "Do you know what I was 5 years ago?" She shook her head. "I was a rogue," he said. "My uncle had slaughtered my parents and taken my throne. He hunted me across 3 territories. I had been running for weeks. I was bleeding out from a poisoned dagger wound in my side. I was starving. I had accepted that I was going to die behind those crates in the market." He reached out, hesitating for a second before covering her small, cold hand with his large, warm one. Hundreds of people walked past that alley. Merchants, warriors, nobles. They smelled the blood and walked faster. But you, a girl with no wolf, no status, and holes in her shoes, you stopped. Isabella looked down at their joined hands. I didn't do much. I just didn't want you to be alone. You gave me your food when you were clearly hungry yourself, he corrected her. You tore off the hem of your dress to bind my wound. You looked at a monster covered in filth and blood, and you didn't see a threat. You saw a boy. He squeezed her hand. That meat pie gave me the strength to stand up. That bandage stopped the bleeding long enough for me to reach the Shadowlands. You didn't just give me lunch, Isabella. You gave me my life. You gave me my kingdom. Tears pricked Isabella's eyes. She had held on to that memory for years as a small moment of kindness, never knowing that her small act had shaped the fate of nations. So, he whispered, his thumb brushing her knuckles, there is no price. There is no debt. Everything I have is yours. If you want to eat, eat. If you want to sleep, sleep. If you want me to burn the Silver Moon Pack House to the ground, say the word, and it will be ash by morning. Isabella stared at him, her breath hitching. He meant it. She could see the absolute truth in his golden eyes. She slowly reached out and took the bread. She took a bite. It tasted like salvation. She ate ravenously, abandoning her manners. Eric watched her, not with judgment, but with a grim satisfaction. When she was done, she wiped her mouth, feeling fuller than she had in a decade. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. Eric stood up, moving to the tent flap. Rest now. We ride at dawn. The Obsidian Fortress is a day's journey, and the road is rough. Eric, she called out before he could leave. He paused, looking back over his shoulder. Why do I feel... I struggle to find the words. Why do I feel warm when you're close? I don't have a wolf. I shouldn't feel auras. Eric looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You are not wolfless, Isabella. Your family is blind. They mistake silence for emptiness. But the quietest storms are always the most destructive. He slipped out into the night, leaving her alone in the warmth with the impossible thought echoing in her mind.
Chapter 4. The Obsidian Fortress. The journey to the Obsidian Fortress was a blur of snow-covered pines and rocky terrain. Isabella rode in front of Eric on his massive warhorse, a black stallion named Ragnar. The horse was as intimidating as his master, with hooves the size of dinner plates and a temper that made the vanguard wolves keep their distance. Yet when Eric had lifted Isabella onto the saddle, Ragnar had stood perfectly still, sensing the precious cargo. For hours, Isabella leaned back against Eric's chest. His arms bracketed her, holding the reins, creating a cage of safety that she never wanted to leave. They didn't speak much. Eric seemed content to simply hold her, occasionally adjusting the fur cloak to ensure her nose didn't freeze. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of violet and blood orange, the forest abruptly ended. Look, Eric murmured in her ear. Isabella gasped. Ahead of them, rising from the jagged spine of the Black Mountains, was the Obsidian Fortress. It didn't look like it was built. It looked like it had been carved directly from the heart of the earth. The walls were made of sheer black volcanic glass and stone, rising hundreds of feet into the air. Watchtowers pierced the clouds, and banners bearing the sigil of the shadow wolf, a black wolf head on a silver field, snapped violently in the wind. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. It was impregnable. That is your home? Isabella whispered, feeling a fresh wave of inadequacy. This was a place for warriors, for legends, not for scullery maids. "That is our destination," Eric corrected, guiding Ragnar down the winding stone path toward the massive iron gates. As they approached, a horn blasted from the ramparts, a deep, mournful sound that echoed through the valley. The iron gates, heavy enough to stop a battering ram, groaned open. They rode into the main courtyard. It was a hive of activity. Soldiers in black leather and chainmail were training, sparks flying from clashing swords. Blacksmiths hammered red-hot steel. But as Ragnar trotted in, the entire courtyard went silent. Hundreds of warriors stopped. They turned to look at their king. Then, in a wave of synchronized movement, they dropped to one knee, fists pressed over their hearts. "Hail, Alpha King!" they roared in unison. Isabella shrank against Eric, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of their loyalty. She felt exposed, dirty, and small. She was still wearing her ruined dress under the cloak, her hair matted with dried wine. Eric brought the horse to a halt near the main keep. A man approached, tall, lean, with graying hair and eyes that were sharp and calculating. He wore the insignia of a high general. "My king," he said, bowing low but keeping his eyes on Isabella. "We did not expect your return so soon, and you have brought a guest." Eric dismounted fluidly, then reached up to lift Isabella down. As her feet touched the cobblestones, her legs wobbled. Eric's hand was instantly there to steady her. "General Draven," Eric said, "prepare the royal suite." Draven's eyebrows shot up. "The royal suite? My king, that is your private wing. Surely the guest chambers would be more appropriate for a refugee." Draven's nose twitched. He smelled the wine, the fear, and the lack of a wolf aura. He looked at Isabella with the same dismissal her stepfather always had. To him, she was weak. Isabella looked down at her boots, wishing the ground would swallow her.
Eric didn't shout. He stepped forward, placing himself between Isabella and his general. The temperature in the courtyard dropped 10 degrees. "I did not ask for your opinion on interior decor, Draven," Eric said softly. "I gave a command. This woman is not a refugee. She is the reason I am standing here today. Anyone who looks at her with disrespect disrespects me. Do I make myself clear?" Draven paled. He saw the look in his king's eyes, the look of a wolf standing over its mate. He bowed deeply, this time with genuine fear. "Crystal clear, my king. Forgive me. I will have the staff prepare the bath and the chambers immediately." "Go," Eric dismissed him. He turned to Isabella, his expression softening instantly. "Ignore him. Draven is a soldier. He sees the world in terms of strength and weakness. He doesn't know how to look deeper." "He is right, though," Isabella whispered, hugging the cloak tight. "I am weak, Eric. Look at me. I'm filthy. I'm shaking." "You survived 10 years in a house that wanted you dead," Eric said firmly, placing a hand on the small of her back to guide her toward the keep. "You didn't break. That is not weakness, Isabella. That is endurance. And now you don't have to endure any more. Now you can live." They entered the keep. It was a labyrinth of stone corridors, lit by torches. Eric led her up a winding staircase to the highest tower. He pushed open a set of double doors. The royal suite was larger than the entire servants' quarters back at Silvermoon. A massive fireplace roared with life. A 4-poster bed draped in black velvet dominated the center. But what caught Isabella's eye was the bathroom, visible through an archway. It was sunken into the floor, made of black marble, and filled with steaming water that smelled of lavender and salts. "The maids will bring you clothes," Eric said, standing by the door. "Clean clothes. Silk, wool, whatever you want. Burn the dress you are wearing. I never want to see you in rags again." Isabella walked toward the fire, the warmth seeping into her bones. She turned back to him. He was watching her, his hand lingering on the doorknob, as if he couldn't bear to leave her but knew he had to give her privacy. "Eric," she said softly. "Yes." "Why the royal suite?" she asked. "General Draven was right. It's your room." Eric looked at her, his golden eyes burning with terrifying honesty. "Because it is the safest place in the kingdom, and the only place I want you to be." He closed the door, leaving her alone in the sanctuary of the beast. Isabella moved to the bathroom. She shed the heavy fur cloak. With shaking fingers, she unlaced the ruined blue dress, the symbol of her failed attempt to be a person, and let it drop to the floor. She stepped into the hot water. It stung her cuts, but the pain was cleansing. She scrubbed her skin until it was raw, washing away the wine, the mud, and the smell of the scullery and the memory of Rafe's hand on her face. She leaned back against the marble, closing her eyes. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the door opening. But as she relaxed, the water around her began to ripple, not from her movement, but from a vibration coming from deep within her chest. She opened her eyes, and the reflection of the black marble, her eyes weren't just silver anymore. They were glowing, a faint, pulsating luminescence that lit up the steam. She touched her face, terrified. Eric's words echoed in her mind. "You are not wolfless." Deep inside her soul, something that had been sleeping for 19 years stirred. It wasn't a whisper. It was a growl. And it was hungry.
Chapter 5. The Awakening of the White. The water in the black marble tub had turned tepid, but Isabella didn't move. She sat perfectly still, staring at the ripples spreading from her chest to the rim. "You are not wolfless." Eric's words echoed in the steamy silence, bouncing off the stone walls. For 19 years, her lack of a wolf had been her identity. It was the reason her father had rejected her, the reason Rafe had enslaved her, and the reason she felt like a ghost in a world of predators. A wolf was a soul. Without one, she was just a shell. But the reflection in the water told a different story. Her eyes, usually the color of tarnished silver coins, were pulsing. It was a faint, rhythmic bioluminescence, like a heartbeat made of light. And deep in her chest, beneath the ribs that stuck out too far, she felt a pressure. It wasn't pain, it was presence. It felt like something massive was curled up inside her, stretching its limbs after a long, coma-like sleep. A sharp knock on the door shattered the moment. The glow in her eyes vanished instantly, snapping back to dull silver. "My lady?" A soft, trembling voice called out. "The king has sent clothes." Isabella scrambled out of the tub, wrapping a large towel around herself. She felt exposed, not just physically, but spiritually. "Come in!" Two maids entered, keeping their heads bowed low. They carried a bundle of fabrics with the reverence one might show a holy relic. They didn't look at Isabella's bruises or her malnourished frame with disgust. They looked at her with terrified awe. To them, she wasn't a scullery maid. She was the creature the Deathbringer had brought home. "King Eric ordered these for you," the older maid whispered, laying the garments on the velvet bedspread. He said to burn the blue dress." Isabella looked at the pile. It wasn't a gown for a ball. It was practical, yet undeniably regal. Trousers made of soft black wool, a tunic of cream-colored silk, and a heavy robe embroidered with silver thread. "Thank you," Isabella said, her voice hoarse. The maids hurried to help her dress, their hands gentle as they navigated the purple and yellow bruises Rafe had left on her arms. When they brushed her hair, they gasped softly at the texture. It was platinum blonde, nearly white, a color rare among wolves. When they left, taking the ruined blue dress with them, Isabella stood before the full-length mirror. She didn't recognize herself. The silk tunic hid her ribs. The high collar hid the bruising on her neck. She looked formidable. The door handle turned. Isabella spun around as Eric walked in. He had removed his armor. He wore a simple black shirt that clung to his chest and loose trousers. Without the metal plating, he looked less like a war machine and more like a man, though a man built on the scale of a mountain. He stopped dead. His golden eyes swept over her, drinking in the sight. His nostrils flared, taking in the scent of lavender soap and her own vanilla essence, now unmarred by wine and mud. "Better," he rumbled, closing the door behind him. The sound of the latch clicking was loud in the quiet room. "You gave me your room," Isabella said, gesturing to the massive bed. "Where will you sleep?" Eric walked over to the fireplace, throwing a log onto the dying embers. Sparks flew up the chimney. He turned to face her, leaning against the stone mantelpiece. "I don't sleep much, Isabella. The silence is rare for me. But tonight I will sleep on the chase by the window. You take the bed." "I can't take your bed," Isabella protested, stepping forward. "I'm a guest, a refugee. I can sleep on the rug. I'm used to hard floors." Eric's face darkened. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, stopping inches from her. The heat radiating from him was intoxicating. "You will never sleep on a floor again. Do you understand? You are not a servant here. You are not a burden. You are the only thing in this castle that matters." Isabella looked up at him, her heart hammering. "Why?" she whispered. "Because I gave you a meat pie? Eric, that's not enough. You're looking at me like I'm precious. But I'm broken. Look at me." She pulled up the sleeve of the silk tunic, revealing the ugly mottled bruises on her forearm. "I am weak," she said, her voice shaking. "I let them do this to me for 10 years. I didn't fight back until tonight. I'm not a queen. I'm a victim." Eric stared at the bruises. A muscle in his jaw jumped. He reached out, his large, calloused fingers hovering over the marks without touching them, as if his own roughness would make them worse. "You survived," he said softly. "A victim breaks, Isabella. A survivor endures until the moment they can strike. You threw water at a noble in a room full of alphas. You walked out into a blizzard rather than beg. That is not weakness." He looked into her eyes. "And as for being broken, we are all broken. I killed my own family to take this throne. I wake up screaming 3 nights a week. I am a monster to the rest of the world. But when I look at you..." He trailed off, his hand finally making contact. He cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing her jawline. His skin was rough, but his touch was agonizingly gentle. "When I look at you," he whispered, "the noise in my head stops." Isabella leaned into his touch instinctively. The connection was electric. She felt that strange hum in her chest again, the sleeping giant stirring. "My eyes, in the bath, they glowed." Eric froze. His golden gaze sharpened. "What color?" "White, like starlight." Eric let out a breath that sounded like a prayer. He pulled his hand away, running it through his dark hair, looking overwhelmed. "White," he muttered to himself. "Of course, it had to be." "What does it mean?" Isabella asked, panic rising. Is something wrong with me?" Eric looked back at her, a fierce, possessive pride burning in his expression. "No, Isabella, nothing is wrong. It means your family was wrong about everything. You aren't wolfless. You are a white lichen." "A lichen?" Isabella blinked. "Lichens were myths. ancient, powerful ancestors of werewolves. Your wolf isn't absent, Eric explained, his voice intense. She is simply too powerful for a child's body to hold. She went dormant to save you. She needed time. She needed strength. And, he paused, his eyes dropping to her lips, she needed a mate to wake her up. The word hung in the air. Mate. Isabella's breath hitched. A mate? Eric stepped back, the intensity in his eyes dimming into a guarded mask. He realized he had said too much too soon. She was traumatized, fresh from abuse. He wouldn't force a bond on her she wasn't ready for. Rest, he said abruptly, turning toward the window. We will talk about legends tomorrow. Tonight, you just need to sleep. He threw himself on the chase lounge, turning his back to her, effectively ending the conversation. But the air in the room remained charged, heavy with the scent of ozone and vanilla, and the unspoken truth that bound them together.
Chapter 6. The General and the Ghost. Isabella woke with a gasp, her hands flying up to protect her face. It took her a moment to realize that no blow was coming. There was no cold attic draft, no shouting, no smell of mold. There was only the softness of velvet sheets, the warmth of a dying fire, and the silence of stone. She sat up, her heart racing. The massive bed felt like an island in a sea of luxury. She looked toward the window. The chaise lounge was empty. The blanket was neatly folded. Eric was gone. Isabella climbed out of bed, her bare feet sinking into the thick fur rug. She felt a pang of disappointment that he wasn't there, followed immediately by shame. She shouldn't be dependent on him. She needed to stand on her own feet. She dressed in the clothes from the night before, the black trousers and silk tunic. They fit her perfectly, which was a terrifying thought. How did he know her measurements? Or was it simply that he had watched her closely enough to know? Isabella opened the heavy oak door of the suite and peered into the corridor. It was empty, lit by flickering torches. The Obsidian Fortress walls were dark, carved with reliefs of wolves in battle. She stepped out. She didn't know where she was going, but she couldn't sit still. The energy inside her, the lichen Eric had spoken of, was making her restless. She wandered down a winding staircase, following the faint sound of voices. She found herself on a mezzanine overlooking the great hall. It was a cavernous space, dominated by a long table of black wood. Eric sat at the head of the table. He was back in his armor, looking every inch the Conqueror King. He was flanked by advisors, maps sprawled out before them. But standing to his right was General Draven. The older man was speaking, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "My king, this is madness," Draven was saying, his tone bordering on insubordination. "The Silver Moon Alpha has already sent a raven. He demands the return of his stolen property. He claims you kidnapped his daughter." "Stepdaughter," Eric corrected, without looking up from the map. "And I did not kidnap her. I salvaged her." "It is a diplomatic nightmare." Draven slammed his hand on the table. "We just secured peace with the Twin Territories. If we go to war over a servant girl, the Council will revolt. She is of no value, Eric. She brings nothing to the Alliance but baggage." Isabella gripped the stone railing of the balcony. No value. The words stung, familiar and sharp. "She is not a servant," Eric said, his voice dropping to that dangerous low rumble. "And if the Council has a problem with who I choose to shelter, they can take it up with my blade." "Is it worth it?" Draven pressed, his voice softening, becoming more personal. "You have spent 5 years building this kingdom from the ashes your uncle left. You are the Deathbringer. You are feared. Why risk it all for a ghost with pretty eyes? Send her back, or pay them off, but do not let her stay in the royal wing."
Isabella felt sick. She turned to leave, to run back to the room and hide, but her boots scuffed against the stone. Draven's head snapped up. His predator's hearing had caught her. "Speak of the ghost," Draven sneered, looking up at the balcony. Eric stood up instantly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He looked up, his face softening when he saw her, but Isabella wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Draven. The old Isabella, the one who endured, would have run. She would have apologized and hidden in the attic. But the Isabella who threw a pitcher of water at her tormentor? The Isabella who had a sleeping lichen in her chest? She didn't run. She walked down the stairs. Her legs were shaking, but her head was high. She walked straight into the lion's den, approaching the table where the most powerful men in the kingdom stood. "I am not property," Isabella said, her voice trembling but clear. "And I am not a ghost." Draven turned to face her, crossing his arms. He was a large man, scarred and intimidating, but he didn't frighten her the way Rafe did. Rafe enjoyed cruelty. Draven was just pragmatic.
"Then what are you, girl?" Draven challenged. "You are a wolfless refugee who has put a target on my king's back. Do you know how many enemies Eric has? Do you know how many people want to find a weakness in his armor?" He took a step closer, looming over her. "You are a weakness. You are a crack in the shield. If you care about him at all, you will leave." "Draven," Eric warned, his hand drifting to the hilt of his sword. "That is enough." "No," Isabella said, holding up a hand to stop Eric. She looked Draven in the eye. "You're right. I have nothing to offer. I have no army. I have no gold. And I suppose, in your world of blood and steel, that makes me worthless." She took a step toward the general, surprising him. "But I know what it means to survive when the whole world wants you dead," she whispered fiercely. "I endured 10 years of hell without breaking. Your king didn't bring me here because I'm a weakness, General. He brought me here because I'm the only one who remembers him as a man, not a monster." She glanced at Eric, then back to Draven. "I won't leave. If Marcus wants war, let him come. I have been afraid of him my whole life. I'm done being afraid." Silence descended on the hall. The advisor stared. A scullery maid had just stood down, the high general of the Obsidian army. Eric watched her, a look of profound awe on his face. He saw the fire in her. He saw the queen rising from the ashes of the servant. Draven stared at her for a long moment. His nostrils flared, testing the air. He smelled her fear. It was pungent, but he also smelled the steel beneath it. "You talk a big game for someone who trembles like a leaf," Draven grunted, but the sneer was gone. "If you are to stay, you will not be a burden. You will work. We do not carry dead weight in the Obsidian Fortress." "I know how to work. I can cook, I can clean, I can mend." "We have servants for that," Draven scoffed. "If you are under the king's protection, you will learn to defend yourself. I won't have my soldiers dying to save a damsel who can't hold a knife." He looked at Eric. "If she stays, she trains. That is my condition." Eric looked at Isabella. He expected her to refuse. Training in the Obsidian Fortress was brutal. It broke grown men. "Deal," Isabella said, instantly. Eric smiled. It was a rare, true smile that transformed his face. He walked around the table and stood beside her, his presence a solid wall of heat and support. "Then it is settled," Eric said. He looked at Draven. "She trains, but she trains with me." Draven's eyes widened. "My king, you don't have the time." "I will make time," Eric said, his voice finalizing the matter. He looked down at Isabella, his golden eyes gleaming. "If she is to be a target, then I will make her the most dangerous target in the world." Isabella looked up at him. The fear was still there, gnawing at her stomach, but for the first time it was outweighed by something else. Purpose. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was preparing for war.
Chapter 7. iron and velvet. The first rays of dawn hadn't yet breached the black mountains when Eric woke her. He didn't shake her. He simply stood by the bed, fully armored, his presence a silent alarm that roused Isabella from the deepest sleep she had ever known. "Up," he said softly. "Draven will be watching. If you are late, he will say you are weak." Isabella scrambled out of the warm velvet cocoon, the cold air of the fortress hitting her skin like a slap. Her body ached, not from exertion, but from the tension of the previous day. She dressed quickly, in the training leathers the maids had left, stiff, boiled leather trousers and a padded tunic that felt heavy on her slight frame. When she followed Eric down to the training sands, the courtyard was already alive. The sound of steel clashing against steel rang out in a brutal rhythm. 200 soldiers, the elite Obsidian Guard, were sparring. As Eric entered, the fighting stopped. Every head bowed. "Carry on," Eric commanded. The violence resumed instantly. He led Isabella to a secluded corner of the arena, away from the main melee. He stopped and turned to her, his golden eyes scanning her from toe to head. "You have never held a weapon," he stated. It wasn't a question. "I've held a kitchen knife," Isabella said, wrapping her arms around herself to stop the shivering. "I can peel a potato in 3 seconds." "A potato does not fight back," Eric said grimly. He reached to his belt and unsheathed a dagger. It was black steel, wicked and curved, with a hilt wrapped in worn leather. "This," he said, holding it out, "is not a tool. It is an extension of your will. Take it." Isabella reached out. The weapon was heavier than she expected. The balance felt wrong in her unpracticed hand. "Grip it like you mean to keep it." Eric stepped closer, his voice dropping into a murmur. "Loose grip means you lose a finger. Tight grip means you lose speed." He moved behind her. Isabella's breath hitched as his massive chest pressed against her back. He reached around, his large gloved hands covering hers, adjusting her fingers on the hilt. The heat radiating from him was distracting. Every nerve in her body was firing, aware of exactly where he was touching her. He was a wall of iron and muscle, and she was soft. "Focus," Eric whispered near her ear, his breath stirring her hair. "I'm trying," she squeaked. "Your stance is wrong," he murmured. He nudged her feet apart with his boot. "Widen your base. If you stand like a servant, you fall like a servant. Stand like a queen." Isabella grit her teeth and planted her feet. Stand like a queen. For hours, he ran her through drills, basic motions, slash, parry, step, slash. Her arms burned, her lungs screamed. The heavy leathers chafed her skin. She was exhausted, sweating despite the freezing wind. Every time she faltered, she expected him to yell, to hit her like Rafe used to. But Eric never raised his voice. He was relentless, yes. He didn't let her rest. But his corrections were patient. Again, he would say calmly, "Keep your elbow in. Protect your heart." By mid-morning, a small crowd had gathered. General Draven was standing on the balcony, watching with a critical eye. A few off-duty soldiers lingered near the armory, whispering. "They're watching me fail," Isabella panted, wiping sweat from her eyes. Her arm was trembling so bad she could barely hold the dagger. "Let them watch," Eric growled. "They are waiting for you to quit. Are you going to give them the satisfaction?" "I can't." Isabella dropped the dagger. It clattered on the stone. "Eric, look at me. I have no muscle. I have no speed. I'm not a warrior." "Pick it up," Eric commanded. "I can't," she cried, the frustration boiling over. "I'm just the girl who scrubs floors. You're wasting your time." Eric moved faster than thought. He lunged at her, a practice sword in his hand, swinging toward her midsection. It wasn't a lethal blow, but it was fast, too fast for a human. Isabella didn't think. She didn't plan. A surge of heat erupted in her chest, the sleeping giant waking up with a roar. Her vision sharpened to a terrifying clarity. She saw the arc of Eric's sword in slow motion. She felt the air displace around the blade. She didn't dodge. She moved. It was a blur of white light. Isabella sidestepped with supernatural speed, grabbed the fallen dagger from the ground, and brought it up to Eric's throat before his sword could connect. The world snapped back to normal speed. Isabella stood there, chest heaving, the tip of the black dagger pressing against the pulse point of the Alpha King's neck. Eric had frozen. His sword was halted inches from her hip. The courtyard went deadly silent. The soldiers who had been whispering were now staring with slack jaws. General Draven on the balcony leaned forward, gripping the railing so hard the stone cracked. Isabella looked at her hand. It was glowing. A faint, ethereal white mist was rising from her skin, swirling like starlight. I don't know how, Isabella gasped, dropping the dagger as if it were molten lead. The glow faded instantly, leaving her dizzy and nauseous. She stumbled back. Eric slowly lowered his sword. He touched his neck, where her blade had rested. A tiny bead of blood surfaced. She had been fast enough to graze him. He looked at her, his golden eyes wide with shock. And then pride, ferocious, terrifying pride. He turned to the staring soldiers. "What are you looking at?" Eric roared, his voice shaking the walls. "Back to work." The soldiers scrambled, terrified to be caught gawking. Eric turned back to Isabella. He grabbed her shoulders, not to hurt, but to steady her swaying form. "You said you had no speed. Isabella, you just move faster than a beta in full shift." I felt hot, Isabella whispered, looking at her trembling hands. "It felt like something else moved my body." "That is the lichen," Eric murmured. He pulled her close, shielding her from Draven's prying eyes with his cloak. "She is waking up faster than I thought. We have to be careful. If Marcus finds out you are a white lichen, he won't just want you back. He will bring an army to enslave you." "I'm scared, Eric," she admitted, burying her face in his chest armor. "Good," he said, resting his chin on the top of her head. "Fear keeps you sharp, but you don't need to be afraid of her. That power is yours. And as long as I drop breath, no one will chain it again."
Chapter 8. The Nightmare and the Raven. Night fell over the Obsidian Fortress like a heavy shroud. The wind howled through the peaks of the Black Mountains, a mournful song that rattled the window panes of the royal suite. Isabella lay in the massive velvet bed, staring at the ceiling. Her body was screaming from the training. Every muscle felt bruised, torn, and re-stitched. But her mind wouldn't settle. She kept replaying the moment in the courtyard, the white light, the speed, the feeling of absolute power that had surged through her veins for a split second. It was intoxicating, but it was also terrifying. She was becoming something she didn't understand. Across the room, near the embers of the fire, Eric slept on the chaise lounge. He was usually silent as a stone, but tonight he was restless. It started with a low whimper, a sound so incongruous coming from the massive alpha that Isabella thought she imagined it. Then came the growl. "No," Eric muttered in his sleep. His voice was thick with panic. "No, don't. Blood everywhere." Isabella sat up. "Eric?" He didn't hear her. He began to thrash, his limbs jerking violently. The chaise lounge creaked under his weight. "Get out!" he roared, suddenly thrashing as if fighting an invisible enemy. "Get out of my head!" The sheer volume of the shout shook the room. The aura radiating off him turned chaotic and jagged, black waves of panic that hit Isabella across the room, making her gasp for air.
The noise. He had told her about the noise, the madness that plagued alphas who had seen too much death. Isabella didn't call the guards. She didn't run. She slid out of bed and crossed the room, ignoring the oppressive weight of his aura pushing her back. "Eric, wake up," she whispered, approaching him carefully. He was caught in a nightmare, fighting a war in his mind. His claws were partially extended, shredding the leather of the chaise lounge. Sweat soaked his shirt. "Eric!" She reached out and touched his shoulder. Reaction was instant. Eric's eyes snapped open, but they weren't golden. They were pitch black, the eyes of a pharaoh wolf. He didn't see Isabella. He saw an enemy. He snarled and lunged, his hand closing around her throat. He slammed her back against the stone mantelpiece, pinning her there. His claws dug into the wall on either side of her head. "Die!" he roared, raising his other hand to strike. Isabella couldn't breathe, but she didn't struggle. She knew that if she fought, his predator instincts would take over and he would kill her. She looked straight into his black, void-like eyes. She summoned every ounce of calm she had. Puppy. The nickname slipped out unbidden from a memory of a story she once heard. No, that wasn't right. She needed to reach him. "Eric," she rasped, placing her small hands gently on his chest, right over his thundering heart. Right over his thundering heart. "It's me. It's Silver." The word hung in the air. Silver. Eric's hand froze mid-strike. He blinked, the blackness in his eyes receding like a tide, revealing the panicked gold underneath. He saw her. He saw his hand around her throat. He saw the fear in her eyes, not fear of him, but fear for him. He released her as if he had been burned. He stumbled back, crashing into the small table, knocking over a pitcher of water. "Isabella," he choked out, his voice broken. He looked at his hands, shaking violently. I nearly... He backed away until he hit the far wall, sliding down it until he was sitting on the floor, burying his face in his hands. "Get away from me. I'm dangerous. The noise, it's so loud tonight. It won't stop screaming." Isabella rubbed her throat. It would bruise, but he hadn't crushed it. She looked at the most powerful king in the world, reduced to a trembling boy in the corner. She walked over to him. "No, stay back," he warned, not looking up. Isabella ignored him. She knelt on the floor in front of him. She reached out and pulled his hands away from his face. "Look at me," she commanded softly. Eric looked. He looked wrecked. "Is it the uncle?" she asked. "The one you killed?" "It's all of them," he whispered, his voice ragged. "My family, the soldiers I killed to take the throne, the rogues, they scream in my head, Isabella. They tell me I'm a monster. They tell me I deserve to be alone." "They're lying," Isabella said. She moved closer until her knees touched his. She took his face in her hands. "Listen to me," she said. "You are not the blood on your hands. You are the man who gave his cloak to a freezing girl. You are the man who is sleeping on a couch so I can have a bed." She leaned her forehead against his. "Let me in," she whispered. "Let the lichen help." She didn't know what she was doing, but instinct took over. She closed her eyes and pushed a wave of her own energy, that cool white starlight, toward him. She visualized a blanket of snow falling over a battlefield, covering the blood, silencing the screams. Eric gasped. He felt it physically. A cool, soothing silence washed over his brain, extinguishing the fire of the madness. For the first time in 5 years, the screaming stopped. His shoulders slumped. He let out a long, shuddering breath, collapsing forward into her arms. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, his breathing jagged. "It's quiet," he whispered, sounding amazed. "God's Isabella. It's quiet." "I've got you," she murmured, stroking his damp hair. "Sleep, Eric. I'm here." They stayed like that for hours, on the floor, the king wrapped in the arms of the girl he had saved, who was now saving him. Morning arrived with a cruel awakening. A sharp rapping on the balcony glass startled them both. Isabella awoke stiff, her head resting on Eric's chest. They had fallen asleep on the rug. Eric awoke instantly, the vulnerability of the night vanishing behind a mask of steel. He looked at the window. A massive black raven was perched on the railing. It wasn't a wild bird. It wore a leather band on its leg with the sigil of the Silver Moon Pack. Eric stood up, helping Isabella to her feet. His face was grim. He opened the glass doors and the raven hopped in, dropping a scroll onto the floor before flying off into the gray sky. Eric picked it up. He broke the seal, wax stamped with Alpha Marcus's crest. He read it in silence. Isabella watched the color drain from his face. His aura flared, not with panic this time, but with a cold, lethal rage. "What is it?" Isabella asked, her stomach twisting. Eric handed her the scroll. Isabella read the jagged scrawl of her stepfather. "To the usurper King Eric, you have stolen property of the Silver Moon Pack. The girl, Isabella, is a fugitive guilty of assaulting a noble. Return her within 3 days, or we will consider this an act of war. Furthermore, we have heard rumors. If the girl possesses the white blood, she belongs to her family. If you do not return her, we will not come alone. The High Council does not suffer lichens to live outside of their control. Return the runt, or watch your kingdom burn. Alpha Marcus." Isabella dropped the scroll. Her hands were shaking. "He knows," she whispered. "How does he know about the white blood? I didn't even know until yesterday." "Spies, or he suspected all along, and that's why he kept you beaten down. If a white lichen is born to a pack, that pack becomes royalty. He threw you away thinking you were broken, and now he realizes he threw away a crown." "He's going to bring the council," she said, terror gripping her. "Eric, the council governs all the packs. If they come, they'll kill you to get to me." He turned on her, his eyes blazing. He grabbed her shoulders, pulling her close. "Look at me," he commanded. "You are never going back to that house. Do you hear me? Never!" "But he'll burn your kingdom." "Let him try," he snarled, a dark smile touching his lips. It was the smile of the Deathbringer. He turned and walked toward the door, grabbing his sword belt. "Get dressed, Isabella. Training is over. It's time to prepare for war."
Chapter 9. The Map of Scars. The Obsidian Fortress transformed. Before, it had been a place of quiet, brooding menace. Now, it was a hive of lethal industry. The forges roared day and night, the smoke choking the stars. The ring of hammers on steel was a constant, rhythmic heartbeat that echoed through the stone corridors. Isabella stood in the war room, a circular chamber high in the central keep. It was crowded with the highest-ranking officers of the Shadow Army. They were large men and women, scarred veterans of Eric's conquest, smelling of leather, oil, and skepticism. They looked at Isabella not as a queen, but as a liability, a bomb that had been dropped in their lap. "This is suicide," General Draven said, his voice low and tight. He traced a finger over the large map sprawled across the black table. "Marcus hasn't just brought the Silver Moon Pack. Our scouts report banners from the High Council. He has convinced them that you are harboring a dangerous magical fugitive. If we fight the council, we fight the entire law of the wolf nations. Let them come, Eric said. He sat at the head of the table, sharpening a dagger with a whetstone. Scritch, scritch. The sound set Isabella's teeth on edge. The council has grown fat and corrupt. They fear the white lichen because they cannot control her. If we hand her over, they will vivisect her to study the magic, and then they will kill her. He looked up, his golden eyes sweeping the room. Is there anyone here who wishes to hand an innocent woman over to be butchered? The generals shifted uncomfortably. They were warriors, not executioners, but they were also pragmatists. We don't want her dead, my king, a female commander named Vanya said gently. But we only have 3,000 swords. Marcus has brought 10,000. We cannot hold the valley against those numbers. We need a strategy better than let them come. Eric stopped sharpening the knife. He looked at the map. It showed the terrain of the Silver Moon territory, thick forests, river crossings, and the fortress itself. We need to know their supply lines, Eric muttered. We need to know where Marcus will stage his archers. But his territory has changed since I was a rogue. I'm fighting blind. You're not fighting blind. A soft voice cut through the heavy tension. All heads turned to Isabella. She had been standing in the shadows near the hearth, trying to be invisible. But as she looked at the map, she realized she knew it, not as a general, but as a slave. She walked to the table. The generals parted, watching her with guarded curiosity. Isabella reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and pointed to a ridge on the western side of the Silver Moon territory. Here, she said. The maps say this is a dense forest. It's not. Marcus had it clear-cut 2 years ago to build a private hunting lodge. The ground is soft marsh now. If he tries to march heavy siege engines through there, they will sink. Draven narrowed his eyes. How do you know this? Because I scrubbed the mud off his boots every time he came back from inspecting it, Isabella said, her voice gaining strength. She moved her finger to the eastern river. And here? The bridge looks solid, but the supports are rotted. Rafe embezzled the money meant for repairs. It won't hold a cavalry charge. If you lure them across, it will collapse. She looked up at Eric. And the back gate of his war camp? He keeps the key in a hollow statue of a wolf in his study. He thinks no one knows. But I know. I dusted it every Tuesday. Silence descended on the room. Isabella looked around at the faces of the seasoned warriors. She whispered, I was invisible to them for 10 years. People say things in front of furniture that they would never say in front of an enemy. I know his secrets. I know where he is weak, Eric. Eric looked at her. The pride in his eyes was so intense it felt like a physical caress. He stood up and handed her a piece of charcoal. He commanded, draw. Show us everything. For the next 3 hours, Isabella wasn't a victim. She was an asset. She mapped out the hidden paths, the weak walls, the egos of the Silver Moon commanders. She turned her trauma into tactical intelligence. When the meeting finally adjourned, the generals looked at her differently. Vanya nodded to her as she left, a mark of respect. Only Draven remained behind with Eric and Isabella. The intel is good, Draven admitted grudgingly. But it doesn't change the fact that we are outnumbered 3-1. Intel doesn't stop arrows, my king. No, Eric agreed. But a symbol does. A symbol? Eric walked over to Isabella. He took her hand, raising it. Marcus is terrified of her. That is why he brought the council. He knows that if the people find out a white lichen has returned, they will question his authority. The white lichen is a legend of justice. Marcus is a tyrant. Eric looked deep into Isabella's eyes. We don't just fight a war of swords, Draven. We fight a war of faith. Tomorrow, when they arrive, Isabella will not hide in the keep. Isabella's breath hitched. I won't? No, Eric said firmly. You will stand on the wall. You will let them see the white light. You will show his army that they are marching against a goddess. I can't control it, Eric, Isabella panicked, pulling her hand away. It only happens when I'm scared or angry. I can't just turn it on like a lamp. Then we will practice, Eric said firmly, until your hands bleed or the sun comes up. Because if you cannot master this, Isabella, we all die. The training yard was empty under the moonlight. The wind bit at Isabella's face, but she didn't feel it. She was too focused on the frustration burning in her gut. Again, Eric ordered. Isabella stood in the center of the sand, her eyes squeezed shut, trying to summon the light. Nothing happened, just the cold darkness. I can't, she screamed, kicking the sand. It's not working. Maybe it was a fluke. Maybe I'm just a freak. Eric walked over to her. He didn't offer comfort. He offered truth. It is not working because you are asking it to come out. You are treating the wolf like a guest. She is not a guest, Isabella. She is you. He circled her. Why did it happen in the bath? I was safe. Why did it happen in the fight? I was protecting you. And why did it happen last night? Isabella flushed. I was healing you. Emotion, Eric said, stopping in front of her. The white lichen responds to pure emotion, not fear, not anger, purpose. He took a step closer, invading her space. The scent of him, rain pine and raw masculinity, filled her senses. Close your eyes, he whispered. Isabella obeyed. Don't think about the light, Eric guided her, his voice a low rumble in the dark. Think about Marcus. Think about Rafe. Think about the wine in your hair. Think about the cold snow. Isabella felt the old shame rising. Now, Eric said, his voice hardening, think about what you want to do to them. The shame twisted. It curdled into something hot and heavy. It wasn't hate. It was justice. They hurt me, Isabella whispered. Yes. They tried to break me. Yes. I want... Isabella's hands clenched into fists. I want them to know I am not nothing. Show them, Eric growled. A snap echoed in her chest. Isabella's eyes flew open. The world wasn't dark anymore. It was washed in a blinding, ethereal silver light. Her hands were glowing, the energy crackling off her skin like white fire. It didn't hurt. It felt like coming home. She looked at Eric. He was bathed in her light, looking at her with an expression of reverent hunger. Beautiful, he breathed. Isabella held the light, breathing hard. She felt powerful, dangerous. Now, Eric said, drawing his sword, let's see if you can hold it while I attack you.
Chapter 10. The Poorly at the Gates. 2 days later, the horizon disappeared. Isabella stood on the high ramparts of the Obsidian Fortress, the wind whipping her black cloak around her legs. Beside her stood Eric, a statue of black iron and grim resolve. Below them, filling the valley floor, was the army. It was a sea of banners. The silver wolf of Marcus's pack dominated the center, but flanking them were the heavy cavalry of the High Council, enforcers clad in red steel. Catapults were being assembled. Thousands of wolves paced the lines. It was enough military power to crush a kingdom. And it was all for her. They're early, Draven muttered, standing on Eric's left. and they are loud. A single horn blast shattered the morning air. From the enemy lines, a small group of riders detached. They rode toward the fortress gates under a flag of parley. At the front sat a man on a white horse. He wore polished silver armor and a velvet cape. Alpha Marcus. Behind him rode a representative of the council, a hooded figure that radiated ancient, dusty magic. "He wants to talk," Eric said, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "He wants to perform for his audience." "I'm going down there," Isabella said. Eric turned to her sharply. "No, you stay on the wall. If you are within range, they might try to smash you." "If I hide on the wall, I look like a prisoner," Isabella said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. "You said I needed to be a symbol, Eric. A symbol doesn't hide." She looked at him, her silver eyes hard. "I mapped his weaknesses. I know him. He is a bully. If I don't face him, he wins." Eric studied her. He saw the trembling in her hands, but he also saw the steel in her spine. "Draven," Eric commanded, "open the postern gate. We ride out to meet them." "My king!" "Do it." 5 minutes later, the heavy iron gates of the Obsidian Fortress groaned open. Eric rode out on the Ragnar, his massive black warhorse. To his right rode Isabella. She wasn't on a pony. She was on a mare bred for war, a gift from Vanya. She wore the black and silver colors of the Shadow Pack. She had no armor, only her silk tunic and trousers and the black dagger strapped to her thigh. They stopped 20 yards from Marcus. The silence on the battlefield was deafening. 10,000 soldiers watched. Marcus looked older than Isabella remembered. His face was lined with stress, but his eyes held the same cruel arrogance. He looked at Eric with disdain. Then his gaze slid to Isabella. For a moment, he didn't recognize her. He was looking for a malnourished servant in rags. He was looking for a girl who flinched. The woman sitting on the warhorse before him held her head high. Her skin was clear, her hair a halo of white gold. "Isabella," Marcus said, his voice booming to be heard by the armies. He put on a mask of pained concern. "Thank the moon, you are alive. We were so worried when you vanished into the storm." "Worried," Isabella repeated, her voice amplified by the acoustics of the valley. "You threw me out, Marcus. You told me to find a ditch to die in." A ripple of murmurs went through the front lines of the Silver Moon army. Marcus's face faltered, then hardened. "You were hysterical, child. You were unwell. We have forgiven you for the scene at the party. Come home. Your mother is sick with worry. She cries for you every night." The mother card. Isabella's heart clenched. It was a low blow. "If my mother cries," Isabella said coldly, "it is because she is married to a monster."
Marcus dropped the act, his face twisted into a snarl. "Enough of this petulance. You are a daughter of the Silver Moon. You belong to us. Come back now, or I will not be responsible for what happens to this thief who kidnapped you." He pointed a gloved finger at Eric. "And you, usurper, you harbor a fugitive. The High Council is here to witness your crimes. Hand her over, and we will leave your fortress standing. Refuse, and we will raze it to the ground." Eric laughed. It was a dark, chilling sound that made the enemy horses shy away. "You speak of crimes, Marcus? The crime is yours. You rejected a child of your own blood because she didn't shift on your timeline. You enslaved a royal." "She is a runt," Marcus shouted, losing his composure. "She has no wolf." "Show him," Eric murmured to Isabella. Isabella closed her eyes. She didn't think about the cold this time. She thought about her mother crying in the kitchen.
She thought about the 10 years of silence. She thought about the trash Marcus claimed she was. She grabbed the thread of power in her chest and pulled. Her eyes snapped open. A shock wave of white light exploded from her body. It wasn't a flicker this time. It was a beacon. Her skin glowed with blinding intensity. Her eyes were 2 stars of pure silver fire. The air around her crackled with raw, unadulterated lichen magic, causing the horses of the enemy line to rear up in panic. The High Council representative gasped, pulling back his hood. "By the moon!" Marcus's horse bucked, nearly throwing him. He stared at Isabella, his face draining of all color. He felt the pressure of her aura. It was heavier than an alpha's. It was ancient. "I am not a runt," Isabella's voice rang out, distorted by the power of the wolf, sounding like a chorus of voices. "I am the white lichen, and I reject you." She pointed a glowing hand at the Silver Moon army. "I reject your blood," she screamed. "I reject your name. I am Isabella of the Shadows, and I am home." The declaration hit the army like a physical blow. The soldiers of the Silver Moon looked at their alpha, then at the glowing goddess on the horse. They were wavering. To fight a white lichen was blasphemy. Marcus saw he was losing them. Panic turned to desperation. "She is a witch!" Marcus screamed, drawing his sword. "It is a trick! Sorcery! Kill the witch! Kill her!" He didn't wait for his army. He spurred his horse forward, charging straight at Isabella, his blade raised to strike her down before her influence could spread. Eric didn't hesitate. "For the Queen!" Eric roared. Ragnar surged forward. Eric drew his massive broadsword, intercepting Marcus's charge with a clash of steel that sparked like lightning. The parley was over. "Archers!" Marcus screamed as he was pushed back by Eric's brute strength. "Loose!" The sky turned black as 10,000 arrows began to fall. Isabella didn't run. She sat on her horse amidst the chaos, her light shining like a lighthouse in a storm, as the first wave of the war crashed against the gates.
Chapter 11. The Siege of Light. The sky had turned into a ceiling of falling death. "Shields!" Eric roared, his voice cutting through the thunder of hooves and the scream of dying men. He abandoned his duel with Marcus instantly. The Alpha King didn't care about honor or single combat in that second. He cared about the unarmored woman on the horse beside him. He yanked Ragnar's reins hard, forcing the massive warhorse to sidestep, slamming his armored body against Isabella's mount. He threw his heavy cloak over her head just as the arrows struck. The sound was sickening, a rhythmic thud, thud, thud of steel tips hitting the wet earth, horse flesh, and iron shields. Eric hissed as an arrow found the gap in his pauldron, biting into his shoulder. But he didn't move. He kept his body curled around Isabella, a living fortress of black steel. "Ride," Eric commanded, slapping the flank of her mare. "To the gate now!" Isabella didn't argue. She spurred her horse, galloping back toward the open maw of the Obsidian Fortress. Eric rode on her flank, deflecting stray arrows with his broadsword, his face a mask of terrifying concentration. They thundered across the drawbridge just as the heavy iron portcullis began to drop. They skidded into the courtyard, the noise of the battle outside instantly muffled by the thick stone walls. Isabella practically fell off her horse, her legs shaking so violently they wouldn't hold her. Eric was there before she hit the ground, catching her. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his eyes scanning her frantically for blood. "Did they hit you?" "I'm fine," Isabella gasped, clutching his arm. She looked at his shoulder, where a black-fletched arrow protruded from the joint. "Eric, you're bleeding." "It's nothing," he snapped, breaking the shaft off without flinching. He turned to General Draven, who was barking orders to the archers on the ramparts. "Draven, status." "They are charging, my king. The Silver Moon Vanguard is pushing for the main gate. They have bought a battering ram." Eric's eyes narrowed. He looked at Isabella. The trap. Isabella swallowed the bile rising in her throat. This was it. The plan she had drawn on the map. The plan that would kill men she had grown up watching from the scullery window. The western flank, she whispered. If they bring the ram, they have to cross the dried riverbed. It looks solid. But it's not, Eric finished. He turned to his trumpeter, signaled the retreat, pull the shadow vanguard back to the inner wall, lure them in. The trumpet blasted a mournful descending note. Outside the walls, the shadow army obeyed. They broke formation, feigning a panic. They retreated from the open field, funneling back toward the fortress, leaving the western approach wide open. Alpha Marcus, watching from his white horse on the hill, saw the retreat and grinned. "They are running!" Marcus screamed, pointing his sword at the fortress. "The usurper is a coward! Send the heavy siege engines! Crush the gate!" The Silvermoon commanders hesitated for a second, then obeyed. The massive battering ram, mounted on iron wheels and pushed by 50 wolves in human form, began to roll toward the western wall. Behind it marched 3,000 heavy infantry. They hit the dried riverbed. At first, the ground held, but as the weight of the iron ram and thousands of armored boots pressed down, the thin crust of dry dirt cracked. Beneath it lay the deep, suffocating marsh Isabella had warned them about, the result of Marcus's vanity project to clear-cut the forest years ago. The ground simply swallowed them. It was chaos. The heavy wheels of the ram sank instantly, pitching the machine forward. Men screamed as they were sucked into the mud, weighed down by their heavy plate armor. The more they struggled, the faster they sunk. The formation collapsed into a panic of flailing limbs and shouting men. From the high wall of the fortress, Isabella watched. She stood, gripping the cold stone battlement, her knuckles white. She saw the banners of her old pack sinking into the earth. She heard the screams of men she might have served ale to a month ago. "Don't look away," Eric said softly, stepping up beside her. He wasn't gloating. His face was grim. "This is war, Isabella. It is ugly. But you just saved 1,000 of my soldiers by stopping that charge." "I didn't save them," Isabella whispered, tears blurring her vision. "I just chose who died." "That is what ruling is," Eric said heavily. "It is choosing the lesser butcher." Down below, the slaughter continued. The Silvermoon army was stuck. The shadow archers on the walls drew their bows. "Loose!" Draven commanded. Arrows rained down on the trapped soldiers. It wasn't a battle anymore. It was an execution. Isabella turned away, burying her face in Eric's cloak. She couldn't watch. She felt the vibrations of the lichen inside her. The wolf wasn't sad. The wolf was fierce, prowling in her chest, satisfied that the enemies were falling. It terrified her. "Stop it," Isabella whispered to the wolf inside. "They are people." "They are the enemy," Eric corrected her, his hand resting heavily on her head. "And they are not done." He pointed to the horizon. Marcus, seeing his vanguard destroyed in the mud, didn't order a retreat. He was screaming in rage, striking his own commanders. He turned to the hooded figures of the High Council. The Red Guard was moving. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were elite enforcers of the Wolf Council, clad in crimson armor, wielding weapons enchanted to pierce magical defenses. There were only 500 of them, but they moved with a terrifying synchronized silence. They bypassed the mud. They moved to the eastern wall, the one Isabella hadn't trapped. "They're sent in the Red Guard," Eric cursed, his aura flaring dark. "Draven! Get the oil! Prepare the secondary defense!" He turned to Isabella. "Go to the keep. Lock yourself in the suite." "No!" Isabella said, wiping her tears. "The wounded are already coming in. I saw them carrying men to the Great Hall. I can't fight, Eric. I can't shoot an arrow, but I can work." "Isabella! I am not going to sit in a velvet room while people die for me," she shouted, her voice cracking. "I told Draven I would work. Let me go to the infirmary. Eric looked at her. He saw the stubborn set of her jaw, the same look she had when she threw the water pitcher. Fine, he relented, but stay away from the doors. And if the alarm bells ring 3 times, that means the wall is breached. You run. Do you understand? You run to the tunnels. I understand, Isabella lied. She would never leave him. Eric grabbed her face, kissed her hard on the forehead, a kiss that tasted of desperation and iron, and then turned back to the battle. "Hold the wall!" the king roared, drawing his sword. "For the shadow!" Isabella ran down the stone stairs, away from the sky of arrows and into the belly of the fortress where the real horror waited.
Chapter 12. The Healer and the Butcher. The Great Hall, once a place of grand strategy and dining, had become a slaughterhouse. The long black tables had been pushed together to form operating slabs. The air was thick with the copper tang of blood, the acrid smell of cauterized flesh, and the low moans of dying men. Isabella tied a clean apron over her silk tunic and rolled up her sleeves. "Water!" a healer shouted from across the room. "I need boiled water and clean linen." Isabella didn't hesitate. She grabbed a pitcher and ran. For the next 6 hours, she didn't stop. She wasn't a queen. She wasn't a lichen. She was a pair of hands. She held down thrashing soldiers while healers dug arrowheads out of their flesh. She stitched wounds with trembling fingers. She carried buckets of bloody water to the drains and brought back fresh ones. No one questioned who she was. In the triage, rank didn't matter. Only survival mattered. "Hold him," a medic yelled as a young wolf, no older than 18. Chapter 12. The Healer and the Butcher. The Great Hall, once a place of grand strategy and dining, had become a slaughterhouse. The long black tables had been pushed together to form operating slabs. The air was thick with the copper tang of blood, the acrid smell of cauterized flesh, and the low moans of dying men. Isabella tied a clean apron over her silk tunic and rolled up her sleeves. "Water!" a healer shouted from across the room. "I need boiled water and clean linen." Isabella didn't hesitate. She grabbed a pitcher and ran. For the next 6 hours, she didn't stop. She wasn't a queen. She wasn't a lichen. She was a pair of hands. She held down thrashing soldiers while healers dug arrowheads out of their flesh. She stitched wounds with trembling fingers. She carried buckets of bloody water to the drains and brought back fresh ones. No one questioned who she was. In the triage, rank didn't matter. Only survival mattered. "Hold him!" a medic yelled as a young wolf, no older than 18, convulsed on the table. His chest was a ruin of claw marks, the work of a Red Guard enforcer. Isabella threw her weight across the boy's legs, pinning him down. He screamed, his eyes rolling back in his head. "It's too deep," the medic cursed, hands slick with blood. "He's not healing. The Red Guard blades, they are poisoned with wolfsbane. It stops the regeneration." "Do something," Isabella cried. "I can't," the medic shouted back, frustration tearing at his voice. "The poison is already in his heart. He's gone." The boy's thrashing slowed. His breathing turned into a wet rattle. He looked up at Isabella, his eyes unfocused, filled with terror. "Mama?" Isabella's heart shattered. She looked at his chest, the jagged wounds turning black from the poison. "He's dying. Just like I was supposed to die in the snow." The vibration in her chest returned. The white lichen stirred, not with anger this time, but with a profound, sorrowful need to fix. Without thinking, Isabella pulled her hands away from his legs and placed them directly onto the boy's bloody chest. "Don't!" a medic warned. "The wolfsbane can burn you!"
Isabella ignored him. She closed her eyes. "Push," she told the light. "Push it out." She didn't visualize a weapon. She visualized a needle and thread made of light. She visualized the poison as black ink and her light as clear water washing it away. The heat in her palms became unbearable. It felt like she was holding a live coal. "Isabella, stop!" someone shouted, but she pushed harder. A gasp went through the room. Underneath her hands, a soft white glow began to pulse. It seeped into the boy's chest. Where the light touched, the black veins of poison retreated. The jagged flesh began to knit together, cells regenerating at a supernatural speed. The boy arched his back, gasping in a massive lungful of air. The rattle in his chest vanished. Isabella pulled her hands back. She staggered, the room spinning violently. The boy was breathing. The wound was gone, leaving only a silvery scar. Silence fell over the infirmary. Every healer, every wounded soldier stared at her. "The white magic," the medic whispered, looking at Isabella with terrified reverence. You brought him back." Isabella looked at her hands. They were shaking uncontrollably. She felt drained, as if she had run 10 miles. "He's alive," she whispered. Before anyone could speak, the double doors of the great hall banged open. Eric stood there.
He was a nightmare. His black armor was dinted and slashed. His cloak was gone. He was covered in blood, so much blood that it dripped from his fingertips to the stone floor. None of it seemed to be his. His eyes were wide, the pupils blown black. The noise was clearly screaming in his head. He scanned the room frantically until he landed on Isabella. He stormed across the hall, ignoring the healers who scrambled out of his way. "Isabella," he rasped. He grabbed her shoulders, checking her over. He smelled the blood on her apron, the boy's blood, and let out a growl of panic. "You're bleeding," he said, his voice thick with the madness. "It's not mine, Eric," she said soothingly, reaching up to touch his face. "I'm okay. I'm safe." "They breached the outer wall," Eric said, his words tumbling out fast. "The Red Guard, they are strong, too strong. I killed them. I killed so many, but they keep coming." He looked at his hands. "The blood won't come off." The healers watched in fear. Their king was breaking. The butcher was losing control. Isabella didn't care about the audience. She saw the terrified boy inside the monster. "Eric, look at me," she commanded, using her alpha tone. She took his blood-soaked hands in hers. She didn't use the magic this time. She was too tired. She just used her touch. "The wall is breached," she asked calmly. "We held them at the inner gate," Eric said, his breathing slowing as her touch grounded him. "But we took losses. Vanya is wounded. Draven is holding the line." He looked at the boy on the table, the one Isabella had just healed. He looked at the silver scar. "You used the light," Eric realized. "You healed him." "I had to," Isabella said. He closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against hers. He didn't care that he was smearing blood on her face. "You saved them. I killed them. That is what we are. Life and death." "My king!" A soldier ran into the hall, panting heavily. He was dragging a prisoner, a soldier in the silver moon colors, his hands bound. "We found this rat trying to sneak into the drainage tunnels. He says he has a message for the Lady Isabella. He says if we kill him, the message dies." Eric turned, the tenderness vanishing instantly. The butcher returned.
He stalked over to the prisoner, grabbed him by the collar, and slammed him against the wall. "Speak, and if you lie, I will rip your tongue out." The prisoner, a young beta with terrified eyes, fumbled in his tunic. "Please, I am not a spy. I am a friend of Lenora." Isabella froze. "My mother?" She ran forward. "Let him go, Eric." Eric hesitated, then dropped the man. The prisoner pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. It was stained with grease and soot. "She paid me. She gave me her wedding ring to smuggle this out. She said you needed to know." Isabella snatched the paper. Her hand shook as she unfolded it. The handwriting was hurried and frantic. "Isabella, Marcus knows about the marsh. He sacrificed the vanguard on purpose to make you use your arrows. The main attack isn't the Red Guard. He has found the old mining tunnels beneath the Obsidian Fortress. He has sent the Shadow Stalkers, assassins who can melt into stone. They aren't coming for the castle, Isabella. They're coming for the royal suite. They are coming tonight. Run, Mama." Isabella looked up, the blood draining from her face. "Eric, the tunnels, the mining tunnels." Eric's face went ashen. "Those were sealed a century ago. No one knows where the entrance is." "Marcus does," Isabella said, the paper crumbling in her fist. "He's not trying to win a siege. He's trying to assassinate us while we sleep." Eric turned to the soldier. "Sound the alarm! Evacuate the royal wing! Double the guard on the cellars!" But even as he shouted the orders, the torches on the walls flickered. The shadows in the corners of the great hall seemed to detach themselves from the stone. They elongated, twisting into humanoid shapes. 10 figures materialized out of the darkness, right in the middle of the infirmary. They wore suits of black leather that seemed to absorb the light. They held curved daggers dripping with green liquid. Shadow Stalkers. And they were standing between Eric and Isabella. "Protect the Queen!" Eric roared, diving forward. But the assassin closest to Isabella was faster. He lunged, his blade aiming straight for her heart.
Chapter 13, The Shadow and the Light. The world contracted to the point of a dagger tip. Isabella saw the Shadow Stalker lunge. Time seemed to stretch and warp, a side effect of the adrenaline flooding her system, or perhaps the waking lichen perceiving the threat before her human mind could. She saw the assassin's eyes, dead, flat, and black. She saw the green liquid dripping from the curved blade. She saw the intent. He is going to kill me. The old Isabella would have frozen. She would have squeezed her eyes shut and waited for the blow, just as she had waited for her stepfather's hand. But the old Isabella died in the snow. Slash, parry, step. Eric's voice echoed in her memory, sharp and commanding. Isabella didn't think, she moved. Her body, drilled for hours on the freezing sands, reacted with muscle memory she didn't know she possessed. She didn't try to block the heavy blow. She was too small. She stepped into it. She dropped her left shoulder, pivoting hard. The assassin's blade sliced through the air where her heart had been a millisecond before, grazing her silk tunic. Isabella screamed, a sound of pure, primal exertion, and drove her own weapon upward. She had kept the black dagger Eric gave her, strapped to her thigh beneath her apron. She ripped it free and thrust it into the only gap in the stalker's leather armor, under the armpit. The blade sank in deep. The assassin gasped, a wet, gurgling sound. His momentum carried him forward, slamming into Isabella. They hit the stone floor together in a tangle of limbs and blood. "Isabella!" Eric's roar shook the foundation of the fortress. Across the room, the king went feral. He didn't fight like a man. He fought like a natural disaster. He decapitated the stalker in front of him with a single brutal swing of his broadsword. He didn't pause. He launched himself across the room, ignoring the other assassins, moving with a terrifying, singular focus toward the woman on the floor. A stalker tried to intercept him. Eric didn't even slow down. He caught the man by the throat and slammed him into a stone pillar with enough force to shatter the masonry. The man crumbled, dead before he hit the ground. Isabella struggled beneath the weight of the dying assassin. His green poison blade was inches from her face, his hand twitching in a final spasm to complete his mission. She shoved him off, scrambling backward through the slick blood. "Stay down," Eric bellowed, reaching her. He stood over her, a tower of black steel and rage. 3 stalkers circled him, their blades drawn. "You cannot stop us, usurper. We are the shadows. We are everywhere." "You are meat," Eric snarled. He engaged them. It was a blur of violence. Eric moved with a speed that defied his size, his broadsword painting the air with arcs of death. But the stalkers were fast too. They darted in and out, their poison blades seeking the gaps in his armor. Isabella watched, her chest heaving. She saw a stalker melting into the shadows behind Eric, raising a dagger to strike at his exposed neck. "Behind you!" Isabella screamed. Eric was engaged with 2 others. He couldn't turn in time. Isabella didn't have a weapon. Her dagger was still buried in the first assassin. She looked at her hands. Purpose. She didn't ask the light to come. She demanded it. She thrust her hand forward, palm open. "No!" A bolt of white energy, solid as a battering ram, erupted from her palm. It hit the stalker square in the chest. There was a sickening crunch as the magical impact threw him backward across the hall. He smashed into a heavy oak table, shattering it. Eric used the distraction. He spun, his sword taking the legs out from under the remaining 2 attackers. He finished them before they hit the floor. Silence fell over the great hall. 10 assassins lay dead. The healers were cowering under the tables. The wounded soldiers were staring in shock. Eric stood in the center of the carnage, his chest heaving. He turned slowly to Isabella. He dropped his sword. It clattered loudly on the stone. He fell to his knees in front of her, grabbing her face with blood-slicked hands. He checked her neck, her chest, her arms. "Did they touch you?" he rasped, his eyes wild with panic. "Did the blade cut you? The poison?" "I'm fine," Isabella whispered, shaking uncontrollably. She looked at the dead man she had killed. She looked at her hands, stained with his blood. "I killed him. Eric, I killed him." "You survived," Eric corrected her fiercely. He pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her neck. He was shaking as violently as she was. "You survived. That is all that matters." General Draven burst into the hall, followed by a squad of Obsidian guards. They took in the scene, the dead stalkers, the carnage, the glowing queen. "Secure the perimeter," Draven shouted. "Check the walls." "The tunnels," Isabella gasped, pulling back from Eric. "My mother's note. They came from the mining tunnels." Eric stood up, pulling Isabella with him. The panic in his eyes hardened into cold command. "Draven," Eric barked, "seal the great hall. Move the wounded to the upper keep." "And you, my king?" Draven asked, eyeing the carnage. "I am going to the cellar," Eric growled, picking up his sword. "We have to find the breach. If 10 got in, 100 more are waiting." "I'm coming with you," Isabella said. Eric turned on her. "No, you are going to the tower, where it is safe." "Safe?" Isabella laughed, a hysterical, jagged sound. She pointed at the dead assassin at her feet. "They were in the infirmary, Eric. There is no safe. They can walk through shadows." She grabbed his arm, her grip bruising. "My light hit him. Did you see it? The magic works on them. You can't fight shadows with a sword, Eric. You need a light." Eric looked at her. He saw the blood on her tunic. He saw the terror in her eyes, but beneath it, the unbreakable resolve of the lichen. He realized then that he couldn't lock her away. She was part of this war now. "Stay behind me," he ordered grimly. "If I say run, you run." "I won't run," Isabella promised.
Chapter 14. The Heart of the Mountain. The descent into the bowels of the Obsidian Fortress was a journey into the throat of the earth. They moved past the wine cellars, past the dungeons, and into the ancient, rough-hewn corridors that predated the castle itself. The air grew cold and stale, smelling of wet rock and rot. Eric led the way, a torch in one hand and his sword in the other. Isabella followed close behind, her hand resting on the back of his belt. Behind them marched 6 of the elite vanguard, their wolves pacing nervously in the cramped space. "The maps show the old mines intersect with the drainage system here," Eric whispered, his voice echoing in the darkness. "But they were collapsed a century ago." "Marcus found a way," Isabella whispered back. "He's been planning this for years. While you were building an army, he was digging a grave." They reached a junction. The tunnel split in 3 directions. "Which way?" Eric asked. Isabella closed her eyes. She couldn't see tracks on the stone floor, but she could feel something else, a cold draft, a shift in the air pressure, and underneath it all, a faint, sickly thrum of dark magic, the same feeling she got from the stalkers. "Left," she said, pointing to the darkest tunnel. "The air is moving, and it smells wrong, like ozone and poison." Eric nodded to the vanguard. "Shields up." They moved down the left tunnel. It narrowed, the ceiling dropping until Eric had to hunch his massive shoulders. The claustrophobia was suffocating. After 10 minutes, the tunnel opened up into a natural cavern. Isabella gasped. The cavern was vast, filled with stalactites, but what occupied the floor made her blood run cold. A breach had been blown in the far wall. Through the jagged hole, moonlight spilled in from the outside cliff face. But standing in the cavern were not just shadow stalkers, there were mages. 5 hooded figures stood in a circle, chanting. In the center of their circle, a massive rune was glowing purple on the floor, a teleportation circle. "They're not just sneaking in," Eric realized, his voice a horror-struck whisper. "They are summoning. They're trying to bring the Red Guard directly inside the walls." As he spoke, the rune flared. A soldier in red armor materialized in the circle, looking disoriented but armed. Then another. "Stop them!" Eric roared. He charged. The battle in the cavern was nightmare fuel. The cramped space made swinging broadswords difficult. The wolves leapt, tearing at the throats of the mages. The Red Guard soldiers drew their poisoned blades. Eric was a whirlwind. He smashed into the line of soldiers, using his shield as a battering ram, knocking 3 men into a deep crevasse. Isabella stood at the tunnel entrance. She saw a mage raise a staff, aiming a bolt of purple fire at Eric's exposed back. "Eric!" She threw her hand out. A shield of white light materialized around Eric just as the fire struck. The impact shattered the shield, but Eric was unharmed. He spun around. Seeing the mage, he threw his dagger. It caught the mage in the throat. But the circle was still active. More soldiers were appearing. 10, 20. "We can't kill them fast enough," Draven shouted, wrestling a Red Guard to the ground. "We have to close the breach." "The ceiling," Eric shouted, pointing his sword at the stalactites hanging over the circle. "Bring it down." But the mages had erected a barrier. Arrows bounced off it. Isabella looked at the cavern roof. It was unstable rock. "I can do it," she whispered.
She didn't wait for permission. She ran into the cavern, dodging a sword swing from a Red Guard. She scrambled up a pile of rubble to a high ledge overlooking the circle. "Isabella, no!" Eric screamed, trying to cut a path to her. Isabella ignored him. She looked at the massive stone stalactite hanging directly over the glowing rune. It weighed tons.
She placed both hands on the cavern wall. She didn't push with muscle, she pushed with her soul. She poured every ounce of the white lichen's power into the stone, commanding the earth to shift. "Break!" she screamed in her mind. "Break!" Her eyes glowed blinding white. The light seeped into the cracks of the rock, expanding, heating, vibrating. A deep, grinding groan echoed through the mountain. The mage leader looked up, terrified. "The White Witch!" Crack! With a sound like a thunderclap, the massive stalactite sheared off the ceiling. It fell. It smashed directly into the center of the teleportation circle, crushing 3 mages and the active rune instantly. The impact shook the entire mountain. The floor of the cavern buckled. The shock wave threw everyone, Eric, the soldiers, the vanguard, to the ground. The tunnel began to collapse. "Out!" Eric roared, scrambling to his feet. "Everyone out!" He didn't run for the exit. He ran for the rubble pile where Isabella was standing. The ceiling above her gave way. A landslide of rocks cascaded down. "Isabella!" she screamed. He lunged, diving over the debris. He grabbed her waist and threw himself backward, covering her body with his own, just as a boulder the size of a carriage slammed down where she had been standing a second ago. Darkness swallowed them. Dust choked the air. Silence. Isabella coughed, her lungs burning. She was pinned, not by rocks, but by a heavy, warm weight. "Eric?" she whispered, pushing at the armor. "I'm here," his voice groaned, sounding strained. He shifted, pushing a slab of rock off his legs with a grunt of effort. A faint light flared. Eric had ignited a small magical flame in his palm. They were trapped in a small pocket of space, sealed off from the main cavern by the collapse. They were alive. Eric pulled her into a sitting position, checking her frantically. "Are you whole? Did the rocks hit you?" "I'm fine," Isabella coughed, wiping dust from her eyes. "You?" Eric slumped back against the wall of their stone prison. He winced, touching his side. His armor was dented, and blood was seeping from a cut on his forehead, masking one eye in red. "I've been better," he rasped. He looked at the wall of rubble blocking their path. "But the breach is sealed. You brought the mountain down on them, Isabella." He looked at her with a mixture of fury and awe. "You reckless, foolish, magnificent woman! You could have died!" "I didn't," Isabella whispered, her adrenaline crashing. She began to tremble. "I stopped them." "You stopped them," Eric agreed. He reached out and pulled her into his lap. He wrapped his arms around her so tight it hurt. "We are trapped," Isabella realized, looking at the ton of rock blocking the way. "Draven will dig us out," Eric said calmly. "The vanguard can smell us. We just have to wait." In the small, dark space, the war felt 1,000,000 miles away. It was just the two of them, breathing the same dusty air. Eric leaned his head back against the stone, closing his eyes. "You killed today, you healed today, and you destroyed a mountain." He opened his eyes, the gold shining in the dim light. "You are no longer the girl in the snow, Isabella." "No, I suppose I am not." She reached up and wiped the blood from his eyebrow. "Does the noise stop down here?" Eric looked at her. He took her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, right where the light had come from. "When you are with me, there is no noise. There is only you." And there, buried beneath the earth, while an army waited above to kill them, the monster and the queen found a moment of perfect peace.
Chapter 15. The Breath in the Dark. Time lost its meaning in the dark. There was no sun, no moon, no war. There was only the crushing weight of the mountain above them and the ragged sound of their own breathing. Isabella sat curled in Eric's lap, her back pressed against his chest. The small magical flame in his palm had flickered out an hour ago, plunging them into absolute pitch blackness. But the darkness wasn't empty. It was filled with the heat of his body and the scent of iron, dust, and pine. "Your heart is racing," Eric murmured. His voice was a low rumble against her spine, the vibration more comforting than any light. "I'm not afraid of the dark," Isabella whispered, her fingers tracing the dents in his breastplate. "I lived in a closet under the stairs for 3 years. Dark is familiar."
"I am not talking about the dark," Eric said. "I am talking about the air."
Isabella paused. She realized he was right. The air in their small stone pocket was growing heavy, stale. It tasted metallic. They were running out of oxygen. "Draven will find us," Isabella said, though her voice wavered.
"He will,"
Eric agreed. His arms tightened around her, a silent vow.
"But if he doesn't, Isabella, you need to know."
"Know what?" Eric shifted, wincing slightly. The wound on his head had stopped bleeding, but he was hurt. He let out a long breath.
"I didn't bring you to the fortress just because of a debt. When I saw you in the snow, when I smelled you, my wolf didn't just recognize a savior. He recognized his other half." Isabella's heart skipped a beat. Mate? It was the most sacred bond a wolf could have. It meant 2 souls cut from the same cloth. "I'm not a queen, Eric," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm broken. I have scars you haven't even seen yet. I flinch when people move too fast. I hoard food because I'm afraid I'll starve. How can I be the mate of the Conqueror King?" "Do you think I am whole?" Eric let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Isabella, I am a butcher. My hands are stained with so much blood, I can never wash them clean. I have nightmares that make grown men weep. I am not a hero. I am a weapon that pointed itself at the world." He grabbed her hand in the dark and pressed it to his chest, right over the thundering drum of his heart. "We are both broken," he whispered. "That is why we fit. Your cracks let my light in. My jagged edges fit your scars." Isabella turned in his lap, reaching out blindly until her hands found his face. She traced the sharp line of his jaw, the rough stubble, and the scar on his brow. "Then we will be broken together," she whispered. She leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was desperate. It tasted of dust and blood and defiance. Eric groaned, a sound of pure need, and deepened the kiss, one hand tangling in her hair, the other gripping her waist as if to fuse her body to his. For a moment, the lack of air didn't matter. The war didn't matter. They were burning alive in the cold dark. Thud! A massive vibration shook the wall behind them. Eric broke the kiss, his head snapping up. "Draven!" Thud! Thud! Crack! The sound of pickaxes hitting stone echoed through the rock. Then a muffled shout. "King Eric! Isabella!" "We are here!" Eric roared back, his voice cracking from the dust. Light pierced the darkness, a tiny beam from a flashlight through a crack in the rubble. Then stones were being pulled away, hands reached through. "Careful!" Draven's voice barked. "Stabilize the roof. Don't crush them." A large slab was heaved aside, and suddenly the blinding glare of torches flooded their small prison. Draven's face appeared in the gap, covered in gray dust and sweat. When he saw them, alive, curled together, the hard-bitten general let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "By the moon," Draven choked out. "We thought the whole mountain came down." Eric stood up, stumbling slightly as his cramped muscles protested. He pulled Isabella up with him, keeping her tucked under his arm. "The breach?" Eric demanded, his voice returning to the command of a king. "Sealed," Draven reported, reaching out to help pull them through the hole. "Whatever she did, the tunnel is collapsed for a mile. No one is getting through there again." They emerged into the main corridor of the dungeons. The entire vanguard was there. When Isabella stepped out, covered in dusted blood, her tunic torn, holding onto the king, they didn't just bow, they went to their knees. It wasn't the disciplined bow of soldiers to a commander. It was the reverence of mortals to a legend. They had felt the earthquake. They knew she had pulled the mountain down. "The White Wolf," a soldier whispered. Isabella looked at Eric. He wasn't looking at his army. He was looking at her with that same ferocious pride. He said softly, "Let's get you upstairs. The sun is coming up, and I think the war is just beginning."
Chapter 16, The Calm Before the Storm. The royal suite was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos beneath the earth. The maids had filled the bath again, but this time there was no shyness. Eric sat on the edge of the massive bed, his shirt off, while Isabella cleaned the cut on his forehead. The room was bathed in the gray light of pre-dawn. "It needs stitches," Isabella murmured, her fingers gentle on his skin. "It will heal," Eric grunted. His healing factor was already working, the skin knitting together slowly. "Save your energy. You use too much magic down there. You are pale." "I feel like I slept for a week and ran a marathon at the same time," Isabella admitted. She sat down beside him, dropping the cloth into a basin of bloody water. She looked at his back. It was a map of violence. Scars crisscrossed his skin, burns, claw marks, stab wounds, a history of pain written on the body of a king. She reached out and traced a long, jagged scar running down his spine. "This one?" "My uncle," Eric said simply. "He missed the spine by an inch." "And this one?" She touched a burn mark on his shoulder. "A dragon in the northern wastes, before I conquered the Shadowlands." Isabella rested her head against his bare shoulder. "You have fought so much." "I had to," Eric said. "To survive." He took her hand. "But today is different. Marcus knows his assassins failed. He knows his sneak attack failed. He is desperate. A desperate man is dangerous, but he is also reckless." Eric stood up and walked to the balcony doors. He threw them open. The valley below was filled with fog, but through the mist the fires of the enemy camp burned like thousands of angry eyes. The sound of drums was beginning to beat, a slow, rhythmic pounding that signaled the march to war. "He will throw everything at the walls today," Eric said, staring at the enemy. "The battering rams, the catapults, the council mages. He cannot afford a siege. He needs to end this before the other territories hear that a white lichen is fighting him." He turned back to Isabella. The golden light of the rising sun caught his profile, making him look like a god of war carved from marble. "There is a path. Through the eastern pass, it is unguarded. I can send you with a squad of vanguard. You could be in the neutral lands by nightfall." Isabella stared at him. "You are trying to send me away? Again?" "I am giving you a choice," Eric said, his voice tight. "If the walls fall today, I cannot guarantee I can protect you. If they take you, Isabella, what the council will do to you, death would be a kindness." He walked over to her, gripping her shoulders. "I love you enough to let you go. Run, Isabella. Live. Be free." Isabella looked at the exit door, then looked at the balcony where the sound of the war drums was getting louder. She thought about the boy she had healed in the infirmary. She thought about the vanguard wolves kneeling in the dust. She thought about the 10 years she had spent hiding, enduring, surviving. She stood up. She was small compared to him, but in that moment her shadow seemed to stretch across the room. "I ran once. I ran into the snow,
And you caught me." She reached up and took his face in her hands. "I am not a runner anymore, Eric. I am the anchor. If the walls fall, we fight in the courtyard. If the courtyard falls, we fight in the hall. If the hall falls, we fight in this room." Her eyes began to glow, a soft, determined silver. "I am not leaving you," she vowed. "We win this together, or we die together." Eric stared at her. The fear in his eyes melted away, replaced by a burning, intense adoration. "Together," he agreed. He turned to the pile of armor on the stand. "Then get dressed, my queen. The sun is up." An hour later, they stood in the courtyard. The entire Shadow Army was assembled. 3,000 soldiers against the 10,000 waiting outside. But the mood had changed. They weren't afraid anymore. They had heard the rumors. They had seen the queen pull down a mountain. They believed. Eric sat on Ragnar, clad in fresh armor, his broadsword strapped to his back. Isabella sat beside him on her mare. She wasn't wearing silk today. Draven had found her a suit of light armor, boiled leather reinforced with chainmail, dyed black. It fit her poorly, but it was functional. At her hip hung the black dagger. The gates groaned. "Open them," Eric commanded. "My king," Draven asked, shocked. "You want to open the gates? We should hold the siege." "No," Eric said. His eyes locked on the enemy lines where Marcus sat on his white horse. "Sieges are for victims. Today we are predators." He looked at Isabella. "Are you ready?" Isabella took a deep breath. She felt the lichen inside her, awake, alert, and snarling. "I'm ready," she said. "Open the gates!" Eric roared. The iron doors swung wide. Outside, the Silver Moon Army was preparing to charge the walls. They stopped, confused, as the gates opened willingly. And then, out of the mist, the Shadow Army charged. They didn't wait to be attacked. They launched a counteroffensive. Leading the charge was a massive black stallion and a white mare. The Black King and the White Queen. "For the Shadow!" The roar of 3,000 throats shook the earth. As they galloped toward the collision point, Isabella didn't close her eyes. She threw her hand forward. A beam of blinding white light shot from her palm, smashing into the front line of the enemy pikemen, shattering their formation right before Eric's cavalry hit them. The final battle for the soul of the Wolf Nations had begun.
Chapter 17. The Red Tide. The collision of two armies was a sound that could break bones. It wasn't just the clang of steel, it was the wet thud of thousands of bodies slamming into each other, the scream of horses, and the guttural roars of shifting wolves. Isabella was in the center of the maelstrom. "Keep moving!" Eric shouted, his voice barely audible over the din. He was a blur of violence beside her. Ragnar, his massive black stallion, kicked out, shattering the ribs of a Silvermoon soldier. Eric's broadsword swung in wide, deadly arcs, clearing a path through the infantry. He wasn't fighting for territory, he was fighting to keep a 10-foot circle of safety around his mate. Isabella wasn't idle. She didn't have the swordsmanship of a king, but she had the instinct of a survivor. A pikeman lunged at her horse's flank. Isabella didn't think. She threw her hand out, panic triggering the light. A pulse of white energy hit the man in the chest, throwing him backward into his own line as if he'd been kicked by a giant. "On your left," Isabella screamed, spotting a council archer aiming at Eric. She focused her will. A beam of light shot from her palm, blinding the archer instantly. He missed his shot, the arrow pinging harmlessly off Eric's pauldron. "Good eyes!" Eric roared, cutting down another attacker. For an hour they held the momentum. The Shadow Army, fueled by the sight of the glowing queen, fought with the ferocity of demons. They were pushing the Silver Moon forces back. But Alpha Marcus had brought the High Council for a reason. "Release the Red Guard," Marcus commanded from the rear lines. "Forget the soldiers. Target the girl." The battlefield shifted. A wedge of 500 crimson-armored soldiers cut through the chaos. They didn't engage the shadow soldiers. They ignored them, taking hits and cuts without slowing down. Their eyes were fixed on the white mare. They were an arrow aimed straight at Isabella. "Eric!" General Draven shouted, hacking at a red guard who ignored him. "They are rushing the center. They want the queen." Eric saw them. A wall of red steel closing in. "Form up!" Eric bellowed. "Protect the queen!" The vanguard wolves tried to close ranks, but the red guard used alchemical fire, glass vials that shattered and exploded in green flames. The vanguard horses panicked, bunking and scattering. In the confusion, Isabella was separated. Her mare reared, terrified by the green fire. Isabella clung to the mane, but a red guard soldier hooked her leg with a polearm and yanked.
She fell. The impact knocked the wind out of her. She hit the mud hard, rolling instinctively to avoid the trampling hooves. "Isabella!" Eric's scream was a sound of pure terror. He tried to turn Ragnar, but 3 Red Guard soldiers leapt onto his horse, dragging the king down into the mud. Eric vanished beneath a pile of crimson armor, roaring and hacking. Isabella scrambled to her knees, gasping for air. She was alone in the mud. A shadow fell over her. The commander of the Red Guard stood there. He was huge, his face hidden behind a crimson steel mask. He held a sword that dripped with the black slime of wolfsbane. "The abomination," he sneered, his voice metallic. "Your light ends here." He raised the sword. Isabella scrambled back, her hand finding the hilt of her black dagger, but a dagger against a broadsword was suicide. "Endure," her mother's voice whispered. "No," the wolf inside her snarled. "Fight!" Isabella didn't try to block the sword. She threw sand, not dirt, but light, into his face. She unleashed a flashbang of pure magical energy right in his eyes. The commander howled, blinded, swinging his sword wildly. The blade missed Isabella's head by an inch, slicing a lock of her hair. Isabella lunged. She drove her dagger into the gap of his knee armor. He grunted, buckling but not falling. He backhanded her with a gauntleted fist. The blow sent Isabella flying. She crashed into the side of a dead horse, her vision swimming. The taste of blood filled her mouth. She looked up, dizzy. The commander was limping toward her, raising his sword for the killing blow. Around her, the shadow army was faltering, seeing their king buried and their queen down. Marcus, watching from the hill, began to laugh. "It is over. Kill her." The commander swung. Clang! A sword intercepted the blow, not Eric's. General Draven stood over Isabella, holding back the massive Red Guard with a grunt of exertion. The old wolf was bleeding from a dozen wounds, but he stood firm. "Get up, girl," Draven roared, straining against the weight. "Get up and fight." The commander kicked Draven in the chest, sending the old wolf sprawling. He turned back to Isabella. But the second bought her time. Isabella stood up. She wiped the blood from her lip. She looked at Eric, who was fighting his way out of the pile of bodies, bleeding and desperate to reach her. She looked at Draven, willing to die for her. She felt the fear, and then she felt the rage. They were hurting their pack. The vibration in her chest stopped being a hum. It became a scream.
Chapter 18.
The voice of the Alpha. The battlefield was loud. The clash of steel, the screams of the dying, the roar of fire. But suddenly, a sound cut through it all. It wasn't a trumpet. It wasn't a shout. It was a howl. It came from Isabella. She threw her head back and let the white lichen take the reins. The sound that tore from her throat wasn't human. It was the primal, resonant call of an apex predator. It was a sound that had not been heard in the wolf nations for 1,000 years. It carried a physical shockwave. The mud around Isabella blasted outward in a ring. The Red Guard commander was thrown off his feet, his armor rattling. Every wolf on the battlefield, friend and foe, froze. Their instincts, hardwired by centuries of evolution, recognized the frequency. It was the voice of the sovereign. Isabella didn't shift. She didn't need to. Her human form was glowing so brightly, she looked like a star fallen to earth. Her hair floated around her face in a halo of silver fire. Her eyes were white voids of absolute power. She stepped toward the Red Guard commander, who was scrambling backward in the mud. "You want the light?" Isabella asked. Her voice was distorted, layered with the growl of a giant wolf. "Then take it." She reached out. She didn't fire a beam. She commanded the energy around him. The air around the commander turned solid white. He screamed as the pressure crushed his armor. The anti-magic runes on his breastplate shattered. The wolfsbane on his blade evaporated. Isabella flicked her wrist. The commander was flung 100 feet through the air, crashing into the silver moon lines like a rag doll. Silence fell over the valley. 10,000 soldiers stared. Isabella turned her gaze to the Silver Moon Army, to the 10,000 wolves who had come to kill her. She didn't hate them. She pitied them. They were following a false alpha. She took a deep breath, expanding her aura until it covered the entire battlefield. It felt like a heavy, warm blanket descending on every soul. "Enough," she commanded. The word hit them with the weight of a mountain. The weapons of the Silver Moon soldiers suddenly felt too heavy to lift. The wolves in their shifted forms whined, tucking their tails. Their biology was rebelling against the order to fight. A wolf cannot attack a lichen queen. It is against the laws of nature. Alpha Marcus on his hill felt his control snap. "What are you doing?" Marcus screamed, striking his own lieutenant. "Fight! She is just a girl! Kill her!" But his soldiers didn't move. They were looking at Isabella with terrified awe. Isabella walked forward. She walked through the mud, past the stunned Red Guard, past the Shadow Army. She walked straight toward the Silver Moon lines. "Do not listen to him," Isabella said, her voice carrying without shouting. "He treats you like tools. He spends your lives like copper coins to buy his own vanity." She pointed a glowing finger at the Silver Moon banner. "Kneel." It wasn't a request. It was a biological imperative. The front line of the Silver Moon Army dropped. 2,000 men went to their knees in unison, the sound of armor hitting the dirt echoing like thunder. Then the second line, then the third. It rippled through the army like a wave. The council mages tried to resist, but the sheer weight of the lichen dominance crushed their shields, forcing them down. Within seconds, the war was over. 10,000 soldiers were kneeling in the mud. The only ones standing were the Shadow Army, who bowed out of respect, not force, Eric and Marcus. Eric stood amidst the bodies of the Red Guard he had slaughtered. He was covered in gore, panting heavily, leaning on his sword. He watched his mate, his quiet, shy Isabella, command an entire nation with a single word. He had never loved her more. Isabella kept walking until she reached the base of the hill where Marcus sat on his horse. He was the only enemy left standing. His face was a mask of purple rage and abject terror. "You," Marcus sputtered, backing his horseway, "you are a monster." Isabella stopped. The glow slightly revealed the human girl beneath. She looked tired, bruised, and muddy, but her eyes were steel. "No, father," she said softly. "I am the Alpha." She looked up at him. "Get down." Marcus tried to draw his sword, to rally his men. "I am Alpha Marcus of the Silver Moon. I do not bow to a wolfless runt." Eric stepped up beside Isabella. He didn't speak. He just let his aura, the black, suffocating aura of the Deathbringer, flare. Marcus looked at the kneeling army. He looked at the White Queen. He looked at the Deathbringer. He realized finally that he was alone. Slowly, shaking with humiliation, Alpha Marcus climbed down from his horse. He stood in the mud, stripped of his army, stripped of his dignity. "Isabella," he choked out, trying to pivot, trying to find a way to manipulate her. "Daughter, please, I was misguided. The council forced me. I only wanted to protect you from your own power." Isabella looked at him. "Protect me?" "Yes," Marcus nodded frantically, seeing an opening. "I was hard on you to prepare you, to make you strong. Look at you now, a queen. I did this. I made you." He took a step toward her, hands open. "We are family, Isabella. Blood. You wouldn't hurt your own father, would you?" Isabella looked at him. She remembered the cold attic. She remembered the wine in her hair. She remembered the snow. She smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "You're right. I won't hurt you." Marcus sagged with relief. "Thank the moon, you are merciful. Like your mother." "But," Isabella continued, stepping aside, "he might." She gestured to Eric. Eric stepped forward. He sheathed his sword. He didn't need steel for this. He cracked his knuckles. "Hello, Marcus," Eric rumbled. "You threw my mate into a snowbank." Marcus's eyes bulged. "Wait, mercy, I surrender." Eric punched him. It was a simple, brutal right hook. It broke his nose, his jaw, and his pride. The Alpha flew backward, landing in the mud at the feet of his own kneeling soldiers. He spit out teeth and blood, trying to crawl away.
Chapter 19. The Knee of the Tyrant. The mud of the battlefield was cold, but Alpha Marcus was sweating. He lay on his back, gasping for air through a broken nose. His vision was blurry, but he could clearly see the two figures looming over him against the gray sky. The Deathbringer, cleaning his knuckles with a rag, and the White Queen, watching him with an expression that was terrifyingly void of pity. "Get up," Isabella said softly. Marcus scrambled to his knees. He looked around for help. His army, 10,000 strong, was still kneeling. His generals were looking at the ground, refusing to meet his eyes. The High Council mages were in chains, subdued by the vanguard. He was utterly alone. "Isabella, please," Marcus wheezed, blood bubbling past his lips. "Be reasonable. I am an Alpha. You cannot humiliate me like this. It goes against the old laws." "The old laws died the moment you threw your daughter into a blizzard," Eric growled, stepping forward. "You want to talk about laws? The punishment for attempted regicide is death by dismemberment. Shall I start with your left arm or your right?" He drew his dagger. "No!" Marcus shrieked, scuttling backward in the mud like a crab. "Isabella, tell him to stop! I am your father! I gave you life!"
And then you tried to end it, Isabella said. She didn't stop Eric, but she placed her arm on his. Wait. She looked toward the rear lines of the Silvermoon army. Bring them. General Draven marched forward. Behind him, 2 shadow soldiers dragged 3 women through the mud. Lenora, Clara, and Gemma. Clara and Gemma were sobbing hysterically. Their silk dresses, the same ones they had worn to mock Isabella, were ruined. They looked at Isabella with wide, terrified eyes. They didn't see the runt anymore. They saw a goddess who could crush them with a thought. Lenora was silent. She looked at Isabella, then at Marcus, and finally at the ground. Shame radiated off her in waves. Marcus saw them and scrambled toward his wife. "Lenora, tell her how we suffered. Tell her we did it for her own good." Lenora looked at her husband, the man who had beaten her daughter, the man who had sent assassins. "We didn't suffer, Marcus. We ate roast duck while she starved in the attic." Marcus froze. "You ungrateful cow! I protected you!" "You silenced me!" Lenora screamed, finally breaking. She turned to Isabella, tears streaming down her face. "I am so sorry, Isabella. I was a coward. I let him hurt you because I was afraid of being homeless. I chose my comfort over your life." She fell to her knees in the mud, bowing her head. "I don't deserve your mercy. Do with me what you will." Isabella looked at her mother, the woman who had slipped her food in secret, but never stood up for her in public. "You're right," Isabella said quietly. "You were a coward, and I will carry those scars forever." She walked over to Lenora. She didn't pull her up. She let her kneel. "But you sent the note. You warned us about the tunnels. You saved Eric's life. For that, you have earned your safety." Isabella turned her gaze to Clara and Gemma. The stepsisters flinched, clinging to each other. "Please, Isabella," Clara wailed. "We were just teasing. We didn't mean it. We're sisters." "Sisters?" Isabella laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "You poured wine on me. You called me trash. You treated me like a slave." She pointed to the horizon, toward the neutral lands. "You like my old clothes so much? You can have my old life. You are banished. You have 1 hour to leave the territory. If I see you again, I won't hold Eric back." Clara and Gemma gaped. "But we have no money. We have no wolf skills. We'll starve." "Then you better learn to peel potatoes," Isabella said icily. "Get them out of my sight." Draven dragged the screaming sisters away. Now only Marcus remained. "And you," Isabella said, turning back.
"You can't banish me," Marcus snarled, trying to regain a shred of dignity. "I am the Alpha. The land is tied to my blood." "Not anymore," Isabella said. She walked up to him. She placed her hand on his forehead. "Eric," she said, "what is the penalty for an Alpha who betrays his pack?" "The stripping," Eric answered, his voice dark with satisfaction. Marcus's eyes widened in true horror. "No, no, kill me instead. Don't take the wolf." "You don't deserve the wolf," Isabella whispered. She closed her eyes. She reached into his soul with her white magic. She found the bond between Marcus and his wolf, a bond twisted by greed and cruelty. She didn't break it. She burned it. Marcus screamed. It was the sound of absolute agony, worse than any physical wound. He convulsed in the mud as the golden energy of his alpha status was ripped out of him. It dissolved into the air, reclaimed by the earth. When the screaming stopped, Marcus lay panting in the dirt. His eyes were no longer the amber of a wolf. They were dulled, flat human brown. He was just a man, an old, weak man. "You are nothing," Isabella said, echoing the words he had said to her 1,000 times. She turned to the Silver Moon army. "Your alpha is dead. This man is a stranger. Take him to the border, leave him in a ditch. Let him see if he can endure the winter." 2 Silver Moon soldiers, men Marcus had bullied for years, stepped forward. They didn't look at their former master with pity. They grabbed him by the arms and dragged him away, ignoring his weeping pleas. Isabella watched him go. She didn't feel joy. She just felt light. The weight of 10 years was finally gone. She swayed, exhaustion suddenly crashing over her. Eric was there instantly. He caught her before she fell, pulling her into his hard, blood-stained chest. "It's done. It's over, Isabella. You won." Isabella buried her face in his neck, inhaling the scent of pine and victory. "We won," she whispered.
Chapter 20. The Crown of Starlight. 6 months later. The winter had passed. The snow had melted from the peaks of the Black Mountains, replaced by a carpet of wildflowers that painted the valley in violet and gold. The Obsidian Fortress was no longer a place of dread. The gates stood open. Merchants from all 5 territories traveled freely in and out, trading grain, steel, and stories. The great hall was filled with music. Isabella sat at her vanity table in the royal suite. The room had changed. The dark velvet drapes were gone, replaced by airy white silk. Vases of dandelions, Eric still insisted on picking them for her, sat on every surface. She looked in the mirror. The girl who stared back wasn't hollow-cheeked or bruised. She was radiant. She wore a gown of silver silk that shimmered like water. On her brow sat a circlet of white gold, woven to look like thorns and vines. "You look nervous," a voice said from the doorway. Lenora stood there. She looked healthier, too. She wasn't cowering. She was holding a velvet cushion bearing a heavy black crown. Lenora had chosen to stay. She worked in the kitchens, not as a slave, but as the head mistress. It was hard work, but it was honest work, and for the first time in her life, she was proud. "It's the council," Isabella admitted, smoothing her dress. "They are all here, all the alphas. They are waiting for me to fail." "They are waiting to bow," Lenora corrected her gently. She walked over and placed a hand on Isabella's shoulder. "They have seen what you did to the harvest. The crops are double what they were last year. The sick are healed. You are the White Queen, Isabella. They don't doubt you." She paused, her eyes shining. "I am so proud of you, baby. Not because you are a queen, but because you stayed kind." Isabella smiled, squeezing her mother's hand. "Thank you, Mama." The door opened again. This time, the air in the room shifted, becoming charged with electricity. Eric entered. He wasn't wearing armor. He wore a formal tunic of black velvet with silver embroidery, and a heavy cloak of midnight blue. He looked devastatingly handsome. The jagged scar on his brow was still there, but the darkness in his eyes was gone. The noise hadn't returned in 6 months. He walked over to Isabella, ignoring Lenora, ignoring the crown. He only had eyes for his mate. "You take my breath away," he rumbled, leaning down to kiss her neck. "Behave," Isabella teased, swatting his arm lightly. "We have a coronation to attend." "I'll let them wait," Eric growled, nipping at her ear. "I am the king. I can be late." "I am the queen," Isabella countered, turning to face him. "And I say we go." Eric sighed. A dramatic sound from a man who could crush boulders. "Yes, mistress." He offered her his arm. Ready to rule the world, little wolf? Ready, she said. They walked out of the suite, down the grand staircase, and toward the great hall. The doors opened. The hall was packed. Hundreds of wolves, alphas, betas, emissaries from distant lands stood shoulder to shoulder. When Isabella entered, the silence was instantaneous. They walked down the aisle. Isabella felt the weight of their gazes. 6 months ago, she had been a waitress they laughed at. Now they looked at her with reverence. They reached the dais. General Draven, now looking 10 years younger without the stress of war, stood waiting with the high priestesses. Isabella and Eric knelt. The priestess raised her hands. By the blood of the shadow and the light of the spirit, I bind these two lands, darkness and light, iron and silk. She placed the heavy iron crown on Eric's head. She placed the delicate white gold circlet on Isabella's head. Rise, the priestess commanded. King Eric and Queen Isabella of the United Wolf Nations. They stood. The roar of the crowd was deafening. Long live the queen! Long live the king! Eric didn't look at the crowd. He turned to Isabella. He took her hands in his. I promised you, he whispered, his voice audible only to her amidst the cheering. I promised I would make them look up to you. Isabella looked out at the sea of faces. She saw her mother crying happy tears. She saw the vanguard wolves howling in joy. She saw a kingdom that was safe, strong, and free. She looked back at Eric, the monster who had saved her, the man she had healed. She placed a hand on her stomach. She hadn't told him yet. It was early, just a whisper of a new life, a tiny spark of white light growing inside her. But she knew. You kept your promise, she whispered, smiling as tears filled her eyes. Now, let's go home, puppy. We have a lot to talk about. Eric grinned, a true boyish grin that lit up his scarred face. He swept her up into his arms, right there on the dais, ignoring the gasp of the council. He kissed her soundly, a promise of forever sealed in front of the world. The runt was gone. The slave was gone. The White Queen had risen, and her reign would be one of legend.